a moment. You seemed to certain that you weren't pregnant. May I ask why? Malia's mind raced as she quickly thought of an answer. I had just had my moon's blood only last week, she answered calmly, for this was actually the truth. And since Rob has been away longer than that, I knew it just wasn't possible. And I was relieved about that, to be honest. I know it's selfish of me, but I don't want to birth and raise a child on my own while my husband is off to war. I can understand your reasoning, but Lady Caitlin managed all on her own, Mayor Stillowin reminded her. I distinctly remember her saying that she was grateful that she had Rob while Lord Eddard was away. Well, then Lady Stark and I are two very different people, Malia thought sarcastically. She decided she wanted to change the subject, as she could hardly focus on the topic at hand with the plan she was currently forming in her mind. Could you do me a favor, Mayor Stillowin? Could you send for Julina to bring up some food? I think I'd like to try eating something to get my strength back. Of course, my lady. Mayor Stillowin smiled, patting her leg and slowly getting up from the bed. We are all so glad to see that you are feeling better. She gave him a small smile as he walked away and opened the door, but frowned when Mayor Stillowin abruptly stopped short in the doorway. Rukan! He exclaimed in surprise. What are you doing lurking outside of Lady Malia's room? I told you that I would come find you when she was awake. But now you don't have to, Rukan replied cheekily, peering around the Maester. She's awake, right? I heard her talking in there. It's all right, Mayor Stillowin, Malia called from her bed, sitting up higher against the pillows and attempting to make herself look presentable. She wished that she could bathe before he saw her like this, but there was nothing that could be done about that right now. You can let him in. Rukan pushed past him and hurried into the room, only to stop short a few feet from the bed, looking at her with wide, scared eyes. Malia tilted her head to the side, her hand jumping to her hair. What? Do I look that bad? Is my hair changing color? Am I growing a beard on my face? She gasped, pretending to frantically feel her cheeks. Oh gods, am I going to have to start shaving like Rob and John? Her words had the desired effect, making Rukan giggle and roll his eyes at her antics. He hurried to her side once more as she smiled and patted the space beside her, climbing up on the bed and snuggling beside her. Are you feeling better? He asked, peering up at her through the fringe of his mop of brown hair. You were sleeping for a really long time. I'm feeling much better, Malia reassured him, rubbing his back soothingly. I think I just got a little sick is all. All this cold weather is just finally catching up with me. So you're going to be able to get out of bed soon? Malia smiled down at his concerned little face, pulling him closer for a hug. I will be out of bed very soon. Listen, Rukan. She was interrupted by a knock at the door. Who is it? It's Julina, my lady. I have the food you requested. Come in, Malia called, giving Julina a smile as she entered the room and put the tray down on the table. Hey, little man, could you go tell Bran that I'm awake? I'm going to talk to Julina for a minute and then I'll come find the both of you. All right. Rukan replied happily, surprising her by sitting up and pressing a sloppy kiss to her cheek before bounding off the bed and scampering out the door. If I may say so, my lady, I've never seen Rukan take to someone as quickly as he took to you, Julina commented as Malia sat there, stunned, with a hand to her cheek. He's a good boy, Malia murmured distractedly, before pushing Rukan from her mind and focusing on the task at hand, the small seed of an idea that was already rapidly growing. Shut the door, please, Julina. There are a few things I need you to do for me. Julina sent her a curious, slightly alarmed look but did as she was told. I need you to start packing a few things for me. My lighter cloak, only 2 dresses, both a little lighter than the ones I usually wear. She started listing things off the top of her head, frowning again as she thought out loud. My black flat-heeled boots, my leather gloves, maybe a pair of trousers and metal armor or one of those hard-boiled leather or chainmail shirts, definitely a helmet just in case. Julina looked both scandalized and horrified. My lady, she gasped, eyes wide. I don't understand, why are you talking about battle armor? Oh, Malia chuckled, rolling her eyes at herself. I'm leaving to go join Rob. Julina blinked, nonplussed, and completely forgetting her manners. As in your husband? She squeaked, her voice higher than usual. The one who's fighting in a war. You can't. She spluttered when Malyar nodded. Women aren't allowed. Malyar's eyes narrowed. Do not presume to tell me what I can and cannot do, she warned in a low voice, before explaining herself. Rob told me he loved me before he left, and I've only just now realized that I love him as well, like an idiot. I don't even know what he is probably thinking about me, but I do know that I cannot allow him to go through another day without him knowing how I feel. Being here, away from him, not knowing how he's doing and if he's alright, it's driving me insane, and it's only going to get worse. Malyar sat up straighter, imploring her with her eyes, trying to make her understand. I belong with him, not away from him. I know that it's dangerous and I know that I'm a woman, but frankly I could care less. I've trained to fight since I was 5 years old. I'm not afraid and I'm not one to sit by on the side and watch other people fight. I need to do something, I cannot stay here any longer. Julina, who had been listening to her with her mouth open, swallowed thickly, looking pale. She searched Malyar's determined face for a moment before hesitantly nodding. All right, Julina whispered. I'll gather the things you requested as well as some others that you might need, though it's important that you pack light. When would you need everything ready by? You have a few days, 4 at most, Malyar instructed. I'll need clearance from Mayor Stillowin before I can get up and start walking again, and then I'll need to inform him and the boys that I'll be leaving. She refused to think about that part just yet, not wanting to acknowledge the pain in her heart at the mere thought. She also needed some time to sneak into the crypts, but she wasn't about to mention that part out loud. Julina bowed her head slightly and started for the door before turning back after a moment. You are very brave, my lady, she said in a soft, genuine voice. I'm honored to have been given the chance to serve and to help you. Thank you, Julina, Malyar whispered. Would you please send for some hot water so that I can bathe? The other girl bowed her head once more and left the room. Malyar sat there for another moment, gnawing on her bottom lip as she ran through her plans again and again. First a bath to wash off whatever sickness remains, then a trip to break the news to Bran and Rickon, and finally, one last visit to the crypts. There was no way she was leaving her dragon egg here, she was going to take it with her wherever she went. Chapter 15, Love is a Risk. It appears that luck is on my side again today, Ned rasped, watching as the torchlight grew brighter and a disguised Varys took shape. How long had it been since the time he visited last? Ned lost count of the days that he had been stuck in this pit. He gratefully took the skin of wine that Varys offered and took a swig. You may be my only friend, Varys. Varys gave him a smile dripping with sweetness. Surely not, my lord, there are still many who love you. Your daughter Sansa, for one, she pleaded so sweetly for Joffrey to spare your life. Ned's heart clenched at the mention of his eldest daughter and he felt the anxiety clawing at his throat. How is she? He asked, struggling to sit up straighter. Is she all right? She is mostly unharmed as far as I can tell, Varys answered, but just as Ned was about to relax slightly, he saw Varys hesitate. But Joffrey. His voice trailed off, shrugging. You know how the boy can be. Ned's jaw clenched, and his mind immediately shied away from dwelling on what that heinous boy might be doing to his daughter. What do you want, Varys? He asked, annoyance leaking through his voice. Tell me honestly, no riddles, no games. Varys crouched next to him, his eyes locking on Ned's. Such a simple concept really, peace throughout the realm, he answered honestly. Which is difficult to achieve when your son is marching south with an army of Northmen at his back. Rob. Ned repeated, aghast, mind whirling. But he's just a boy. A boy fighting for his father's freedom, Varys reminded him gently. There have been boy conquerors before, I can assure you. But it is Stannis Baratheon who is giving the Queen the most trouble. He may be a proven battle commander, but he is utterly without mercy. It matters not, Ned disagreed, shaking his head. Stannis is the rightful heir to the throne. Varys opened his mouth to argue, but Ned wearily held up a hand to stop him. But I've heard everything that you've said and I've had nothing but time to think about my options. My family is the only thing that I have left. If I... He swallowed harshly, the next words tasting sour as they came out of his mouth. If I publicly confess my treason and claim Joffrey as the true heir, do you believe the Queen will allow me to take the black as a promise to keep my daughter safe? Relief shone through Varys' smile. Yes, I believe she will. Circea knows that a tame wolf is more use to her than a dead one. Then if I am going to do this, I'm going to need you to do something for me in return. Ned had been thinking a lot about this. About his past, his regrets and his failings, but most importantly about what he could do to make it right. I need a piece of parchment and a quill. I have a letter that needs to be sent. It would have to be done carefully, of course, a message hidden within a message, just in case it was intercepted. And then, even when the message was uncoded, it was still just a clue, a piece to the puzzle. The truth would be extremely dangerous, for everyone involved. But he had faith that she would figure it out, and then maybe she could fix the mistakes that he had made. Everything is packed and ready, my Lady Julina informed her, placing the last bag on the floor. In this bag I've packed 2 spare dresses and some of the light armor that you requested. She hesitated, looking hesitant and uncertain. I've also taken the liberty of designing something for you. I know that you plan to be fighting and riding too, and I imagine that can be quite cumbersome in a regular dress. It didn't take that long to do, it was quite easy actually. Malia smiled fondly as her handmaiden turned friend began to babble. Relax, Julina, she chuckled. What do you mean you designed something? Julina smiled sheepishly, her face turning red. She hesitated once more before reaching into the bag and pulling out what looked like a dress at first glance. Malia's eyebrows furrowed and she tilted her head to the side. I don't mean to be rude, she began in a curious voice. But what is it? It looks like there's a large part of the dress missing, a very important part of the dress. It is a dress, in a way, Julina explained, reaching back into the bag and pulling out a pair of riding leggings. But I thought this style would be less cumbersome and easier to ride and fight. She put the 2 pieces of clothing together and Malia was finally understand the design. The front part looked like one of her simpler dresses, but it ended around the waistline and flared out around to the back, reaching just above the floor. So it's like trousers in the front and a dress in the back, Malia mused, her eyes lighting up. It's brilliant, Julina. You said you designed this? Julina nodded, looking pleased. Have you ever thought about becoming a seamstress? The poor girl went pink again. Oh no, I couldn't possibly. I think that this is more than enough evidence that you could. Malia interrupted gently. Can I try it on? Unsurprisingly, the black outfit was a perfect fit. Malia put on her flat-heeled boots and stood admiring herself in the looking glass for a moment before going over to her small pile of belongings and picking up her sword. She pulled the scabbard over her head and then slowly slid the sword out of its sheath, carefully moving it through the air. She was pleased with how flexible the dress was and how easy it was for her to move. Unbeknownst to her, Julina was watching her with an odd expression on her face. You really learned how to fight when you were younger, didn't you? She asked in a soft voice. That sword, it looks like it could be an extension of your arm, like it was made to be in your hands. My uncle had it made specifically for me, Malia told her, sheathing the sword and taking it off again. And it does feel like an extension of my arm. I don't know what the fact that I like fighting says about me, but it's all I've ever known. Julina looked thoughtful. Well, I suppose it all depends what you do with it. I think if you use your abilities to help save people, then that sort of makes you a hero, doesn't it? Malia involuntarily snorted, thinking of her strong, near-constant desire for revenge. I'm no hero. You're about to ride off to war to help your husband fight to free his father, Julina pointed out with raised eyebrows. That seems like the act of a hero to me. Have you told Bran and Rickon that you're leaving yet? Guilt and worry flooded through her at the mention of the boys. No. Truthfully, I've been putting it off for as long as possible. But it's been 3 days now and I'm afraid I don't have any time left. Julina looked confused. Why haven't you told them? Malia sighed, leaning back against the bed. I don't want them to be angry or upset with me. We've all been through a lot together, and now it feels like I'm just abandoning them. They might understand. Bran might, Malia corrected, standing to remove her new outfit and put her dress back on. I can't see Rickon being happy with me leaving. Especially since I promised him that I wasn't going anywhere, she added sullenly in her head. And I haven't the slightest idea what Maester Lewin is going to say. All he can do is advise you, Julina reminded her while helping Malia into her dress. He cannot keep you here against your will. Well, I suppose we'll find out, won't we? Malia asked, sighing again once she was presentable. Could you do me one more favor, Julina? Could you gather some food for the journey? Non-perishable would be best, just enough to reach the twins. Julina nodded and bowed her head before turning to leave the room. Malia waited until Julina had closed the door firmly behind her before dropping to her knees and pulling a small chest out from under the bed. She had waited until late last night before she snuck down to the crypts to retrieve her dragon egg. Opening the chest, she felt an immediate sense of tranquility and peace wash over her as she picked up the beautiful egg and cradled it to her chest. I wish that I could hatch you, she murmured to it, lovingly tracing the gold veins that ran through the pearl-white shell. With you by my side, the Lannisters would have no choice but to hand over Lord Stark, Arya and Sansa. Blinking with shock, she nearly dropped the egg as she thought she felt a resounding heat from within. Unsure if she had been imagining it or not and realizing she didn't have time to even attempt to figure it out, Malia closed the chest and pushed it back under the bed, taking the egg and hiding it within the bag of clothes that Julina had packed for her. It made the bag a bit heavier to be sure, but at least without the chest the bag wasn't abnormally bulky. She also added a flask of moon tea, enough to last several months, and the leftover ingredients that she had. Knowing that she couldn't put it off any longer, Malia swallowed the bile that threatened to rise from her throat, and headed for the Maestas Tower. She would start with Maester Luwin first. Telling him that she was leaving would be the easiest. It was a small reprieve, one that she was glad for, but of course that couldn't have worked out for her either. When she knocked on the door of the Maestas Tower and pushed it open, Bran was sitting across from Maester Luwin at the table, Hodder sitting in the corner. "Oh!" she exclaimed in surprise, her stomach twisting itself into knots. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't?" Bran interjected eagerly, looking either pleased to see her or pleased to have his lesson interrupted. "Were you looking for me?" Feeling put on the spot and caught off guard, Malia stammered out, "I know, I wasn't, but I guess I should talk to both of you together then. Is everything all right, my lady?" Maester Luwin asked, looking at her with concern. Malia had to resist the strong urge to blab out all of her problems and defend all of her reasons. She took a moment to compose herself, lacing her fingers in front of her and attempting to keep her face straight. "I've decided that I'm going to leave Winterfell and join Robb." Bran's jaw dropped comically, but Maester Luwin looked unsurprised. "I was afraid that you would think of something like this," he sighed, looking weary. "My lady, women aren't allowed." "Then Robb will keep me in his tent while he's off fighting his war," Malia countered impatiently. "Or he'll try to, anyway. I just can't stay behind, not knowing what's happening or if he's okay. I feel as if I'm going crazy, Maester Luwin, and I can't do it anymore. As silly as this romantic notion may seem to you, he needs to know that I love him and I need to tell him in person. I can't write it in a letter." Bran gave her a childlike frown. "He doesn't know you love him?" he asked in an innocent voice. "But you married Robb a long time ago." Maester Luwin smiled at him fondly. "Love doesn't just appear when a man and a woman marry, Bran," he explained gently. "It takes time to develop, if they're lucky, but sometimes it never does." "I know that," Bran muttered in a small voice. "Nevertheless, my lady, Robb's instructions were clear," Maester Luwin continued in a matter-of-fact voice, turning to look at her once more. "You are to remain here at Winterfell with Bran and Rickon." "Let her go, Maester Luwin," Bran interrupted, in a calm voice, making Malia's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "It's not like we can force her to stay." Maester Luwin was plainly shocked as well. "Bran. I am Lord of Winterfell while Robb is away," Bran reminded him in a loud, firm voice, before his face softened and his voice lowered. "Besides, I know what it's like to feel trapped and want nothing more than to escape." Bran, Malia murmured softly, stepping closer to sit next to him, placing a hand on his arm. "A large part of me does not wish to go. I wish that I could stay here with you and Rickon." "I know," Bran whispered, smiling softly. Gratitude, affection, sadness and relief washed over her, and for just a moment it felt as if her heart was too big for her chest. "I'm going to help Robb free your father and your sisters, and then I am going to bring them home," she told him fiercely, her eyes blazing with her belief in her own words. She saw Bran's smile widen and briefly berated herself for making promises that she wasn't sure she could keep. It was more important than ever that they win. You will take 3 guards with you, Maester Lewin announced in the resulting silence. And that is not up for discussion. You cannot travel hundreds of leagues on your own. You may be capable of defending yourself, but a woman traveling alone is just asking for trouble, and eventually you will find it. All right, Malia agreed, nodding her head. Thank you, Maester. Julina has been helping me gather a few things for my journey. She's packed some clothes and some food. A noise came from the doorway and Malia's head snapped around to see Rukun standing there, a look of shock on his face. You're leaving? He accused in an angry voice as he attempted to disguise the hurt that she could so plainly see. Panic clawing at her throat, her heart nearly stopping in her chest, Malia leapt to her feet. Rukun, she tried, but he was in no mood to listen. You promised me that you were going to stay. He shouted, his little face screwed up as tears welled in his eyes. You promised. Rukun, Malia pleaded desperately, taking a step toward him with her hand outstretched. Rukun, please, wait. With one last furious glare, Rukun spun on his heel and dashed out of the Maester's tower. Malia stared at the empty doorway in stunned disbelief, unable to comprehend how she had just managed to fuck up everything she had worked so hard for in such a short amount of time. Malia. Maester Lewin prodded gently, his face sympathetic. Are you all right? I'm fine, Malia murmured automatically, her voice emotionless, one hand resting on the pit in her stomach. I'm going to find Rukun and attempt to fix things. Pick the guards that you would like to accompany me on my journey and have them meet me at the stables in an hour. I'm leaving tonight. She left without another word, without turning around to see the looks on Bran or Maester Lewin's face. Over the past few months, Malia had gotten to know Rukun well enough to learn the place that he retreats to when he was upset. So she headed down to the crypts, trying to rehearse what she was going to say. She couldn't ever remember feeling so nervous or worried in her whole life, and there was a large part of her that feared he would be angry with her no matter what she said. Lifting her dress as she cautiously descended the steps of the crypts, Malia took a deep breath before reaching the first landing. Rukun. Malia called softly as her eyes grew accustomed to the darkness. Rukun, it's Malia. Where are you? I want to talk to you, I need to explain. A loud snarl came out of the darkness and Shagidog rounded one of the corners of the empty crypts, his eyes glowing and his lip curled. Rukun trotted next to him, his hand in his fur as he stared out at Malia distrustfully. Her heart skipped several beats as she was confronted with an angry direwolf for the first time. Eyes wide and her hands held out to the sides, Malia spoke in a calm, even voice. Rick, can you please tell Shagidog to calm down? He's angry with you, Rukun told her, in a matter-of-fact, innocent voice. Malia's expression was sorrowful. No, sweetie, you're angry with me. And I don't blame you. You have every right to be mad at me, trust me. Rukun's abruptly face twisted at her words, looking every bit of the wild boy that people said he was becoming. You lied to me. He screamed, his eyes flashing as his voice echoed through the crypts. Shagidog's rumbling snarls grew louder at his master's obvious agitation, but Malia forced herself to stay where she was as he advanced a step further. You promised me that you were never going to leave. You promised me you were going to stay. And now, you're leaving just like all the others and you're never coming back. Malia's throat tightened, burning, as tears pricked the corners of her eyes. So many negative emotions were swirling through her at the moment that she couldn't find one to focus on. There was the obvious sadness for what Rukun was going through, the self-hatred she was feeling for making this all worse for him, and the feeling of being pulled in two different directions, one towards Rob and the other here with Bran and Rukun. I'm going to come back, Rukun, Malia whispered, just loud enough for him to hear her over Shagidog. Winterfell is my home now. Then stay here, Rukun interrupted again, his expression switching into an imploring one. He looked up at her through the darkness with wide, bright eyes, his lower lip trembling slightly. Don't leave us. Malia's heart nearly broke all over again, and while part of her did want to agree with him and stay, she knew she would hate herself for it as time went on. Rob is my husband, Malia explained, speaking quickly as Rukun's face darkened. And he's your oldest brother. I can't stay behind not knowing if he's alright. Rukun, Please try to understand. My place is by his side. Then just go. He shouted with his hands curled into fists, startling her with his raised voice. I don't want you here anyway. A tear trickled down Malia's cheek as she desperately pleaded with him. No, I'm not going to leave until we talk about this. She persisted in a loud voice, trying to ignore Shaggydogg's warning growls. Please, Rukun. No. He yelled back, screwing his eyes shut and putting both his hands over his ears. No more lying. Go away, go away, go away. Another tear joined the first, a pain in her chest making it difficult for her to breathe. Rukun, she tried again, her voice cracking with emotion. She made to take a step towards him unthinkingly and realized right away that she had made a critical mistake. Shaggydog gave one last thunderous snarl before taking a bounding leap toward her. She dimly heard Rukun shouting, "No, Shaggydog," and only had time to let out a terrified gasp and take a fumbling step backwards, raising her hands in front of her face. Malia felt a sharp pain in her left forearm as his claws connected with her before she hit the ground hard. She stared up with wide, terrified eyes as Shaggydog's teeth snapped an inch away from her face in warning. "Come," Shaggy, Rukun ordered, and the direwolf reluctantly left her. Breathing hard and cradling her left arm against her chest while trying to ignore the feeling of her warm blood seeping through her fingers, Malia sat up to watch Rukun and Shaggydog disappear deeper into the crypts. The tears were now flowing silently and freely down her cheeks, and it wasn't because of the pain, but rather the fragile relationship that she had just managed to shatter into pieces. "My lady, you really should have Maestlawin look at these," Julina tried to reason with her in a soft, concerned voice. Malia was sitting on the edge of her and Rob's bed, staring dejectedly at the floor with her left arm held out towards Julina. "It's just a scratch, all it needs is a bandage," Malia told her emotionlessly, wincing only slightly as Julina cleaned the 3 claw marks on her arm. "Besides, I don't know what Maestlawin would do if he knew that Rukun's direwolf attacked someone. I've already broken Rukun's trust and furthered his abandonment issues. I don't want to also be responsible for losing the one thing that he feels he has left." Julina's face was sympathetic and Malia found that it was an expression that she hated. She finished tying the bandage around Malia's arm and patted her hand comfortingly. "He's too young now, my lady, but one day Rukun will be able to understand what you're doing and why. I'll explain it all again when I get back," Malia mused out loud, more to herself than for Julina's benefit. "I wish that I could take the time to stay and make him understand, but with every day that passes, it's just another battle for Rob as he marches further and further south." She sat there in silence for a long moment before shaking her head to clear her thoughts. "Right. I would appreciate it if you would help me into this new outfit you designed as quickly as possible, because I'm sure my hour is up and Maestlawin is waiting at the stables with the guards he has chosen." "Of course, my lady," Julina murmured, bowing her head. Once Malia had slipped on the makeshift dress, riding leggings and flat-heeled boots, Julina walked over to the bags and picked up the one that Malia had hidden the dragon egg in. "Did you put anything else in here?" Julina asked with a frown, testing the bag's weight. "It's a bit heavier than I remember." "Here, I'll take it," Malia told her quickly, pulling the bag over her shoulder before Julina could protest. "It's really not a problem, Julina, I have to get used to carrying my own things anyway." Julina knew better than to protest and wordlessly picked up the other bag of food before turning to face Malia. They stared at each other in silence for a moment and it looked like Julina was warring with herself. "I know I've already said this, but it truly has been a pleasure to serve you and to get to know you." Malia surprised both herself and Julina by pulling her into a tight hug. Although she blamed most of it on how emotional she was feeling right now, Malia really did appreciate Julina. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome," Julina smiled with slightly watery eyes. "Now come, we mustn't keep them waiting." When they left the castle and walked out into the night, she found the men already there and waiting for her. 3 guards and their horses stood next to an already saddled Shadow, as well as Maestlawin, who looked solemn and was holding a torch, and Hodder, who was carrying Bran. It was a scene that reminded her entirely too much of the night that Rob had left. "Evening, my lady," Maestlawin greeted in a quiet voice. "I have acquired the services of Colrin, Dontar and Benna for your journey south. They have vowed to do everything in their power to see that you safely make it to Lord Rob." Thank you, Malia told them graciously, giving a small smile to the guard who took the bags from her and Julina to tie them to Shadow's saddle. Goodbye, Bran, she murmured, turning to the small boy and placing a hand on his cheek before pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. I will see you soon, I hope. Take care of your brother. I will, Bran promised solemnly, accepting the responsibility. Tell him that I said hello. Malia nodded, looking up at the big man. Bye, Hodder. Hodder, he replied sadly. She moved on to Maester Luwin. How did it go with Rickon? Maester Luwin asked quietly. He sighed as Malia slowly shook her head. I feared as much. He's angry, angrier than I've ever seen him, Malia whispered, shaking her head in concern. He feels as if everyone has left him, and in a way, I suppose they have. Except he doesn't think that any of us are ever going to come back. Well, you would do well to prove him wrong, Maester Luwin encouraged, raising his eyebrows pointedly before pulling her into a hug. Safe travels, my lady. Thank you, Maester Luwin. Malia turned to Shadow, running her hand along his neck and side before putting a foot in the stirrup and swinging her leg over the saddle, marveling at how easy the move was in this new dress. Her newfound guards followed suit and Malia looked down at the rest of them, raising her hand in farewell before looking at her new home one last time. Grabbing Shadow's reins, she turned Shadow around and gently pushed her heels into his sides, following her guards out through the gates of Winterfell and towards her husband. He has an old man's caution, a young man's ambition, and he never lacked for cunning. Catelyn Stark's own words bounced around inside her head as she rode beside Sir Stephen Free, Lord Walder's heir and a man well into his 60s, as well as two other sons that she did not recognize. It was going to take all of her wit and cunning in order to negotiate safe crossing for Robb and his army. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Lord Free held all the power. Robb needed to cross the river quickly in order to aid Riverrun, and she wondered just what price they were going to have to pay. Lady Stark, my lord, Sir Stephen announced as they walked into a great hall empty of any tables. Lord Free, a frail 90-year-old man, was sitting in a large chair on the other side of the room, all of his children and most of his grandchildren sitting on benches on either side of him. His significantly younger wife was standing at his side, her expression a mixture of fear and humiliation as her husband's hand gently caressed her backside. Catelyn felt a pang of pity for the younger girl. What do you want? Lord Free snapped rudely, sneering at her. Catelyn took a deep breath, gathering all of her patience in order to get through this. It is a great pleasure to see you again after so many years, my lord. Oh, spare me, Lord Free interrupted, waving his hand. Your boy is too proud to come before me himself, so he sends his mother in his stead. Father Sir Stephen spoke up with a reproachful look, while a few of his siblings sent each other uncomfortable glances. You forget yourself. Lady Stark is here. Lord Free rolled his eyes. You are not Lord Free yet, not until I die. Do I look dead to you? In the brief moment of silence that followed, Lord Free huffed a sigh of impatience and waved her forward, taking her hand and placing a chaste kiss to the back of it. She fought a grimace. Now, what do you want? To ask you to open your gates so my son and his bannermen can cross the Trident and be on their way, Catelyn answered politely, all too aware of the large number of ears listening to their conversation. Her Lord Free snickered, his eyes cold and calculating. On their way to Riverrun. Oh yes, I'm not blind yet, I know what's been going on. And yet here you sit, Catelyn thought sarcastically. To Riverrun, yes, Catelyn confirmed, tilting her head to the side. I might have expected to find you there lending aid, my lord. You are still my father's bannerman, are you not? I called my swords, did you not see them on my walls? It was my intent to have my sons march as soon as all my strength was assembled, was it not? Several of his sons nodded in agreement. It's not my fault that your fool of a brother lost the battle before we could get there. Why should I hurry and send my sons to die? Patience, Catelyn reminded herself as her anger swelled inside her. Patience. Keeping a pleasant expression on her face, she spoke again. Please, my lord, is there somewhere we can talk in private? We're talking now, Lord Free complained, displeased. Out, out. All of you, out. Yes, even you, wife, he sneered when she glanced down at him uncertainly. She jumped as he slapped her bottom before hurrying out the door with his eyes down. Now, Say what you came here to say, Lord Free ordered once the room was clear. I have already requested that let my son and his bannermen cross the Trident. They have 20,000 men at your gates, which you would be able to see if you were strong enough to climb the battlements. 20,000 dead men once Lord Tywine gets here, Lord Free corrected in amusement, irritating her even further. Don't you try and frighten me, Lady Stark. Your father lies sick, your brother a prisoner, your husband in a cell, and your son doesn't have enough fur to keep his balls warm. You swore an oath to my father, Catelyn tried to remind him, switching tactics. Lord Frey's smirk only grew. Oh yes, I said some words. But then again, I also said some words to the crown. The way I see it, you and your boy are rising up against the king, and that makes you all rebels. I could hand you over to the Lannisters in an instant. Catelyn was quickly losing the patience that she was struggling to retain. Why don't you? She challenged without thinking. Lord Frey's face contorted into a sneer of disdain. Mighty Lord Tywine, Warden of the West and Hand of the King. He eats, sleeps and shits just like the rest of us. He's only got 2 sons and one of them is a twisted little monster. I would have 19.5 more than him when his are dead. That bloody lion can ask for help if he needs it. Catelyn saw her chance and jumped on it. But that is why I am here, my lord. My family and I need your help. Your family has been pissing on me for decades, Lord Free snorted, eyes narrowing. Your lord father didn't come to my wedding, even if he is dying, but he didn't come to the last one either. I know that he calls me the late Lord Free. Did he think I was dead and wouldn't find out? It's just plain disrespectful if you ask me. I'm going to outlive your father just as I outlived his, he cackled, making the hairs on the back of Catelyn's neck stand up. You say you want to cross the river. Well, you can't. The Tullys and the Starks have never been friends of mine. Why should I allow it? Catelyn watched him push himself back in his chair and cross his arms as he waited for an answer. Catelyn found herself wanting to cross her own arms in response, but she refrained. This was it. Let's say that you allow my son and his bannermen to cross the Trident, adding the men that you have gathered to his army. I would require 400 of my men to stay behind for my protection, Lord Free interrupted, holding up a hand. Understood, Catelyn agreed, inclining her head. She was almost afraid to hear the answer to her next question. What would you request in return for our safe crossing? Lord Frey's eyes glittered dangerously, and the corners of his lip twitched up into a smirk. One of my sons, Oliver, will become Lord Robb's squire. He's young now, but I expect a knighthood in good time. Catelyn nodded slowly, examining his request from every angle to look for hidden traps. So far, the request sounded reasonable. It's a pity that your boy is already married to that Dornish girl, Lord Free continued, gripping the armrest of the chair as he leaned forward, his eyes alight. Though from what I hear she's quite beautiful, with a tight little body and perky tits, he sniggered, actually licking his lips. My daughters may not have been as pretty, but he could have had his choice from the lot of them. A most generous offer, my lord, Catelyn responded after a moment, her stomach turning with revulsion, feeling incredibly thankful that Robb was already married to Malia. Yes, it would have been, Lord Free agreed in a superior voice. Your eldest girl is betrothed to the king, but what about your other daughter? Arya, Catelyn told him reluctantly, thinking quickly. She's still in King's Landing. No one was quite sure where she was at the moment, but King's Landing was the last place she was seen, at least. Your girl will marry my son Waldron when they both come of age, Lord Free demanded, his beady eyes watching her every reaction closely. And I'd like to expand my territory. I have too many bloody sons and daughters, grandson and granddaughters, I don't know what to do with them all. Catelyn was shaking her head before he had even finished speaking. I cannot make that decision. Those lands would have to be renegotiated with the neighboring lords, and that could take months. If I could offer another suggestion? She asked, noticing the look on his face. I have another son. Lord Free scoffed, looking offended. You can't mean the cripple boy. I will not sit here and be insulted if you mean to suggest. I can assure you I do not, Catelyn interjected in a raised voice, trying to hide her fury on behalf of her son. By the look on Lord Frey's face, she didn't succeed. My youngest son, Rickon. He's still very young, but a match between him and one of your granddaughters would be beneficial. Fine, fine, Lord Free agreed uncaringly, waving a hand. 2 of my grandsons, both named Walder thanks to their bloody mothers, will be fostered at Winterfell as wards of your family. Lord Free paused, but there was a glint in his eye that told her he wasn't quite finished yet. What more could he possibly ask for? Catelyn thought, mystified and incredulous. He's already gotten 2 marriages, a squire and 2 fosterlings in less than 5 minutes. Has Lord Robb put a son in his Dornish wife's belly yet? He asked speculatively. Catelyn frowned at the question. I couldn't say. Why do you ask, my lord? In return for fostering my grandsons, Lord Robb's firstborn son will be fostered here at the Twins when he reaches his 10th name a day, Lord Free proclaimed, his smirk wide at her obvious shock. He watched her as her mind raced, trying to discover all the implications of what he was demanding. In order to secure Robb's position as Lord of Winterfell, he and Marliar needed to have an heir, preferably a son. If they did have a son, they would lose him to the Twins at age 10 and he would have a difficult time learning how to be the next Lord of Winterfell. Catelyn hesitated before answering. That would be my grandson, my lord, she told him in a serious voice. I don't believe I have the authority. Lord Free shrugged uncaringly. Then I don't believe I can permit Lord Robb to cross the Trident. Fine, Catelyn practically snarled. I agree to your terms. But my son is Lord and in charge of the Northern Army. Give me an hour to speak with him and we will send you our final answer. Lord Free's grin widened, and Catelyn found she hated the pleased look on his face. I will send Sir Stephen to accompany you back to your son. I am so glad we were able to come to an agreement, Lady Stark. I eagerly await the time when we can officially join our families together. Robb's POV. If Lord Free denies our crossing, what are our other options? Robb asked the people surrounding him, bracing his hands on the table as he leaned over the map. We could take the Twins by force, Theon suggested again. We have the numbers. It would take too long, Lord Umber disagreed, shaking his head. We could always find the shallowest point of the Trident and swim across. The horses would have no trouble and we could build rafts for anything heavy. Frustration leaked through Robb and he slammed his hands down on the table, making the men around him jump in surprise. Both options would take too long. Riverrun is in need of our help now. If we don't cross the Trident as soon as possible, then Jaime Lannister is going to take the castle. That is not going to happen, a female voice said, and they looked over to see Lady Catelyn entering the tent, escorted by a guard. Robb felt his heart begin to pound in anticipation. Mother, he greeted, inclining his head. How was the meeting? What toll is Lord Free demanding? Lord Free has granted you your crossing, his mother told him, and there was a collective sigh of relief from the lords sitting around the table. Robb didn't relax, however, knowing there were more to come. He watched his mother's eyes flick around the table, waiting to see if he would dismiss the lords to hear the news in privacy. When he didn't, she continued. In order to cross the Trident, Lord Free has demanded a number of things. First, you will take his son, Oliver, as your squire. He expects a knighthood in good time. Fine, Robb answered impatiently, part of him waiting to hear some really bad news. What else? 2 of his grandsons, both named Walder, are going to be fostered at Winterfell. Lord Free would appreciate it if you could spare a few guards to accompany them. What else, mother? Robb pressed, sensing the unease in the expression on her face. Tell me all of it. His mother took a deep breath, her face drawn. When Arya comes of age, she will marry one of Lord Free's sons, and Rickon will marry one of his daughters. And... She hesitated, her eyebrows drawn together in a sympathetic expression. Your firstborn son will be fostered at the Twins when he reaches 10 years of age. There was a long moment of silence and then the tent erupted in outrage, everyone trying to talk over each other. Fostered at the Twins. Lord Umber roared, spittle flying out of his mouth. It's a bloody insult, that's what it is. Theon looked paler than usual, though his eyes were narrowed in disgust. You cannot allow this, Robb. Your son will be heir to Winterfell, you need to be the one to raise him. The Freys are a lesser house than yours, my Lord Roose Bolton advised in his cold, detached voice. Lord Free knows what he is asking, he knows the position he is putting you in. And while his bannermen were shouting their advice at him, Robb was all too aware of his mother's sympathetic gaze. Enough, Robb muttered, his head swimming. Robb's first, automatic instinct was deny Lord Frey's request, to protect his future son. The old bastard obviously knew the importance of having an heir, recognized an opportunity to weaken the Stark house, and took it. And then, on the other hand, it felt extremely surreal to have to think about a son that he didn't even have yet. His head began to pound as his bannerman continued to talk. Enough! Robb shouted again, raising his voice to be heard and slamming a fist on the table for good measure, feeling a slight sense of relief when they all fell silent at once. His eyes met his mother's. If I were to refuse? Then we don't cross, his mother answered simply. Feeling the weight of his army and his unborn son on his shoulders, all while trying not to think of his wife's reaction to what he was doing, Robb shoved his emotions to the side and focused on what needed to be done. Send word to Lord Frey and tell him that I consent to his terms. Her legs were incredibly sore, her muscles unaccustomed to riding on horseback at this pace for this long, but Malia barely paid it any mind. Each and every one of Shadow's strides brought her closer to Robb, and she could feel her excitement growing with every step. She knew he would be absolutely furious when he saw her, but she missed him so much that she almost didn't care. The depth and strength of her emotion surprised even her. She knew she had wanted to be with Robb because she couldn't stand not knowing what was happening to him, but examining it further, she found that she missed just being with him. She refused to think too closely about how she was turning into one of those sappy women who did nothing but pine for the men that they loved. Malia's gaze refocused as the lead guard, Benna, slowed his pace down to a walk, waiting for Malia and Shadow to catch up with him. My lady, he said, bowing his head respectfully. We are almost at the twins. Malia frowned in confusion. Robb has 18,000 men with him, we should have reached their camp by now if we're almost at the twins. Benna nodded and signaled to the other two guards who fanned out around them, keeping their eyes on their surroundings and any incoming dangers. I believe that Lord Robb and his bannermen successfully acquired passage from Lord Frey to cross the Trident, which is not an easy thing to do. Why not? Malia questioned, trying to remember everything her father had told her about the Lord of the Twins. The only thing that she could think of in this moment was the fact that his whispered nickname was the late Lord Frey. The older man answered her questions patiently. Because Lord Frey is a greedy bastard, he abruptly stopped talking, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. Pardon my language, my lady, he apologized, before continuing on when Malia merely smiled and waved him on. 6 generations ago the Freys built the bridge that spans across the Trident, and ever since, they've been exacting tolls on whomever wishes to cross. It has made their house quite wealthy. Now Malia was beginning to grow worried. What kind of toll? Benna shrugged. It could be anything, money, marriages, land. He hesitated. May I speak freely, my lady? Of course. Going to deal with Lord Frey will take time, and the gods only know what he's going to ask you to give in exchange for a crossing. What are you suggesting, Benna? Malia asked curiously. The only other crossing that I know of is the Ruby Ford, and that's entirely too far away. I agree. Lord Robb probably couldn't have done this due to the size of his army, but before the bridges were built, the soldiers used to build rafts to hold their heavy armor while they and their horses swam across. I suggest we avoid the twins altogether and find the shallowest part of the Trident in order to cross. We'll only need 1 raft for our gear, and Dontar and Colrin can help me. It shouldn't take too long. Malia looked down at Shadow's reins, thinking quickly. All right, she nodded after a moment, her face determined. Let's do it. But we need to do it quickly, and it's imperative that we aren't seen. We'll wait till night falls and cross under the cover of the darkness. If Lord Frey is as everyone says he is, then I don't want him to know that we're going to be crossing the Trident without his knowledge. Robb was once again standing at the head of the table, hovering over it as his eyes danced across the map. They had set up camp briefly after crossing the Trident, just to gather their forces and finalize their plan. All of Robb's bannermen sat at the table around him in silence, watching him as he thought. All right, this is our finalized plan, Robb announced, finally speaking up. We've been in contact with Sir Mark Piper, who has been raiding the Lannister supply trains since they attacked Riverrun. Under the disguise of Tully colors, we're going to send a few hundred men with his own to lure the Kingslayer and his men here, into the Whispering Wood. Robb pointed out the location on the map. Lady Mormont will wait until the Lannister army is in position and she will alert the rest of us to attack. Lord Umber, Lord Karstark, Sir Stephen and Lord Mallister, you will each command your own men. Lord Bolton has already left with 2,000 of his own men to keep Lord Tywine occupied while we attack his son. Any questions? The tent was still silent, the gravity of the situation evident on their faces. Good. We march within the hour. Dismissed. The tension in his shoulders lessened as his bannermen strolled out of the command tent one by one, clapping him on the back as they went off to prepare themselves for war. His eyes were back on the map, running through the plan over and over in his mind. If everyone played their part properly, the execution should be perfect. Bolton would keep Lord Tywine distracted and the Kingslayer would be lured into a trap. You are doing well. Robb started and looked up, unaware that his mother had stayed behind after everyone else had left. She was coming around the table toward him, a proud smile on her face but a sad look in her eyes. You remind me so much of your father. How are you feeling? I'm feeling fine, Robb answered distractedly, his mind still on the map and the fight to come. A little anxious and a little nervous but ready. It was a smart plan to have Oliver help you with your battle armor before the meeting. His mother nodded, her face thoughtful. They definitely. Theon suddenly burst into the tent, his eyes dancing and a giant smile on his face. Sorry for interrupting, he began, not sounding sorry in the least. He actually sounded like he was trying to hold back laughter. Our sentries have spotted 4 riders heading in our direction. You'll never guess who it is. Robb frowned. Well, from the shit-eating grin on your face, it's more likely friend than foe, he muttered while trying to think, sharing a bewildered glance with his mother. Who is it? Theon's grin grew. Come see for yourself. I can't tell if she's really brave or really stupid, he answered, actually snickering before leaving the tent again. She? His mother questioned quietly. Something dawned in her eyes a moment later and with a curious look on her face she followed Theon. She, from Theon's reaction it was obviously someone that he knew, and that meant it was probably someone that he himself knew. Really brave or really stupid? There was only one face that popped into Robb's mind, but there was no possible way that she would disobey him. With an inward snort, knowing that's exactly what she would do, Robb hurried out of the tent. His heart was pounding in anticipation, torn between hoping that it was her even though she would be putting herself in serious danger. He walked as quickly as he could without breaking into a run, heading for the center of the camp, his eyes flicked from face to face dismissing them each in turn when it wasn't the one he was looking for. His head snapped around as the sound of horses echoed through the camp and there she was, her beautiful, proud face searching for him just as he had been searching for her. For a moment he worried about her reaction to him, remembering that the last time they had seen each other, she had been furious with him and he had blurted that he loved her. When her brown eyes met his, a chill ran down his spine and when her face split in a radiant smile, his heart positively soared. Feeling strangely breathless, he watched her pull her horse to a stop and gracefully slide off him. They stared at each other for a moment, both of them drinking in the other eagerly. The rest of the people surrounding them faded into the background, and Robb only had time to take in her strange, form-fitting dress complete with leggings before the moment broke and they started towards each other. It started out as a walk, but as the distance between them closed, both of them broke into a run until they collided with one another, her arms wrapped around his neck and his around her waist. He buried his head in her neck, breathing in the scent of her and hardly daring to believe that this was happening. But he could feel her body pressed against his, could feel her hair as one of his hands twisted in it, pulling back only slightly so he could crush his lips to hers, and 7 hells he felt that all the way down to his toes. He kissed her soundlessly and thoroughly, until both of them had to pull away, gasping for air. It was only then that he became aware of the catcalls and wolf whistles from the dozens of men watching, most of them led by Theon. Still holding Malia close to him, Robb couldn't stop the grin on his face as he waved at them for silence. All right, you dirty bastards, that's enough. Hope you enjoyed the show, but we have a battle to prepare for and win. As the men began to cheer once more, Robb wrapped an arm around Malia's waist and led her to his tent. Malia briefly glanced around, her mouth splitting into a smile as Greywind trotted up to her, licking her hand as she bent down to pet him, tongue lolling out of his mouth as she scratched behind his ears. Bloody hell, Greywind, what has Robb been feeding you, home? Malia murmured, pressing a kiss to his nose. I think you've grown twice the size since I saw you last. Rob couldn't take his eyes off her. I think he's missed you just as much as I have, he told her, watching his wolf nuzzle his wife. Malia stood at the sound of his voice before turning to face him. I know that you're probably furious with me, but I don't follow orders very well for one, and for another I needed to. He cut her off again with another kiss, his hands cupping her cheeks, quickly falling into her, drowning in the taste and feel of her and feeling incredibly intoxicated by it. He wanted nothing more than to rip this odd outfit off of her, but there was no way he could forget about the impending battle. You shouldn't be here, Rob panted, pulling away and pressing his forehead against hers. His eyes fluttered shut when her nails scratched lightly against his scalp as she sweetly pressed her lips to his again, slowly sucking on his lower lip and making him groan, clutching at her hips. I disagree, Malia smiled lightly, her voice soft as she played with the hairs on the back of his neck. She looked up at him, her eyes serious as she tilted her head to the side. Wherever you are is wherever I should be. Rob's gaze softened. We're about to march into battle, Malia. I couldn't just stay behind, locked away when I didn't know what was happening to you, Rob. Malia interrupted, her voice slightly impatient. You can try and send me back to Winterfell, but it will have to be in chains, because I swear to you right now that I will escape every single time. Rob couldn't help but shake his head in admiration at the apparent passion in her voice and the fire blazing in her eyes, even while frustration at her disobedience ran through him. This discussion isn't over, wife, he promised, his voice firm. But now isn't the time. I have to lead my men into battle and I'm going to need you to stay here. Safe. Malia nodded in compliance and Rob paused, looking down at her suspiciously. Really? He asked, perplexed. I was preparing myself for a fight. Malia's hands fixed his hair and straightened his armor. No fight as long as you give me the chance to convince you to let me stay when you get back safely. Her eyes were blazing once more. And you better come back to me safely, do you hear me? As soon as Rob left the tent, a slightly dazed look on his face and his lips significantly more swollen than when he had entered, Malia had her bags fetched and used the distraction of the men preparing for war to her advantage. She felt a little bad that she was lying to Rob yet again, but she was also going to do everything she could to help keep him safe. She fished out the chainmail and leather armor that Julina had smuggled for her and slipped it on, tying her sword around her waist like a soldier would. After making sure that her hair was tied back and hidden in her armor, she slipped out the back of Rob's tent and headed for Shadow, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible. She swiped a helmet lying on the floor on the way, and while it was a little big for her, it would do the job of covering her face perfectly. She looked like all the other Solidus now, albeit a small, skinny one. The horse whinnied nervously as she approached, obviously not recognizing her. Easy, boy, Malia murmured, approaching him slowly and holding out her hand for him to sniff. That's it, Shadow, it's just me, she whispered as he nuzzled her hand and allowed her to pet his neck. Hey! One of the guards shouted when she untied Shadow's reins from the nearby post. What are you doing with Lady Malia's horse? Malia's heart sped up, praying that the guard wouldn't recognize her. Clearing her throat, Malia deepened her voice and said, Lady Malia has requested her horse be brought to her so that she can see her husband off to battle. The guard still looked unconvinced and Malia pushed a little further. Do you want to go and question her? I'm sure she would. No, the guard cut in gruffly and Malia had to suppress a grin. She wouldn't want to question her own orders either. Hurry up and be on your way. Malia saluted the man, making him frown, and went on her way. It was only when the guard was out of sight that she swung her leg up over Shadow's saddle. She urged him forward, easily slipping into the ranks of Rob's men as they started forward into the night, silent for once as they prepared for the big fight. And what a fight it was! She had never seen such a large group of men and horses move so silently through the woods or wait so quietly for the signal to attack. She could smell the sweat, the excitement and the fear from the men surrounding her as they waited in the darkness. She kept a safe distance from Rob, but close enough that she could keep an eye on him, and when a horn sounded, the men around her surged forwards, raising their swords as they moved to attack the group of several hundred men who had just entered the woods. War was far different than she had imagined. While the adrenaline did pump through her body at a startling rate, in the beginning it was slightly difficult to block out the sounds of the men's dying gasps, groans and screams. She had to try harder than she thought she would to block it from her mind, concentrating on surviving. The battle didn't end up lasting long at all. The Kingslayer's forces were significantly outnumbered, and when he realized this, Malia saw him rally his men around him and begin to cut through their opponents, headed directly for Robb. "Kill the young wolf!" he shouted, spurring his horse forward. "Kill him!" "Not a fucking chance," Malia grunted, gritting her teeth as she sliced her sword through her opponent's neck before swinging Shadow around and moving towards Robb. She cut her way through the crowd, desperately trying to move faster, cursing everyone in her way as she watched the Kingslayer kill several of Robb's lords and personal guards. She heard Grey whined before she saw him, leaping from opponent to opponent, his muzzle bloody and his snarls loud. The horses shied away at the sight of him, and more than one rider was thrown. Malia urged Shadow forward as the Kingslayer killed yet another northerner, blocking his way as he tried to get to Robb, who was dealing with 2 men of his own. Jaime Lannister snorted when he saw her, clearly dismissing her as an easy kill. There was nothing that she appreciated more than the look of shock on the face of the man who had murdered her grandmother. His eyes narrowed when she successfully blocked and parried each of his swings, though it only took a few seconds for her to realize that the Kingslayer was just as good of a fighter as her uncle Oberyn. She would need every inch of her wits about her, and she knew she wasn't as skilled at combat on horseback as he was, so when their swords locked, Malia pushed against him with all her strength and launched herself off Shadow's back, tackling the Kingslayer off his horse, both of them landing hard on the ground. Malia immediately rolled out of the way, half her vision obscured by the too large helmet that had twisted sideways on her head. Left with no other choice, realizing that she was now fighting for her life, Malia tore the helmet off with her free hand and took a deep breath. The Kingslayer was already on his feet, a look of confusion on his face. He pointed his sword at her, frowning. "Aren't you the young wolf's wife?" he questioned, tilting his head to the side as he tried to place her face. "Why are you dressed like a man? Were they not in the middle of a battle?" "It's a new fashion style that I thought I'd try out," Malia retorted, twirling her sword and tensing her muscles. The Kingslayer smirked at her. "You were much more appealing in a dress," he taunted before springing forward and engaging her once more. It was very much like fighting her uncle. His moves were more advanced than hers and he was faster and stronger than her. It took all of her strength and skills to keep him at bay, and even with that she was on the defensive more often than not. Her breath hissed through her teeth as his sword sliced right through the leather she wore, cutting into the bicep on her left arm, and she staggered back, panting. "You're good, my lady," the Kingslayer complimented, and she was gratified to see that he was out of breath too, at least. "Trained by your uncle, I presume. What a pity that you're just not quite good enough." Malia looked at the blood trickling down her arm, gritting her teeth against the pain. "You're lucky that wasn't my sword arm," she seethed as he started forward once more. A hair-raising snarl came from her right and Grey Wind came skidding to a halt in front of her, snapping at the Kingslayer with his hackles raised. The Kingslayer stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide as both he and Malia became aware of their surroundings once more. Robb, Theon, Lord Umber and several other lords stood in a circle around them. "It's over," Kingslayer Robb announced, gesturing to the area surrounding them, strewn with bodies clad in Lannister red. "Drop your sword and surrender." "Never," he snarled, lunging forward once more, but Robb's men converged on him, kicking his sword from his hand and throwing in more than a few punches until they forced the Kingslayer into submission, blood running down his face. "Bind him," Robb ordered. He was wearing his emotionless Lord Robb face, but a quick sweep with her eyes told Malia that he was generally unharmed, and that sent a wave of relief through her. His men hurried to follow his orders, putting the Kingslayer in chains and leading him away. "Gather the wounded and bring them back to camp," he continued, and a sinking feeling spread through her when she realized that Robb hadn't looked at her once. "Robb," she tried, taking a step forward, but freezing when she saw his jaw clench at the sound of her voice and his eyes harden. She had never seen him so angry, and she wondered if she had officially pushed him over the edge. Robb turned to Theon. "Escort Lady Malia back to camp and see to it that someone stitches up her arm. I'll deal with her later." Malia had to physically bite her tongue to stop the retort from leaving her lips, knowing that it would just make him angrier and undermine his authority in front of his men. So she said nothing, sheathing her sword and turning away, brushing her hand along Grey Wind's head. "Thanks for the assist, Grey, she murmured before following Theon back to Shadow and back to camp. You know, for a woman you have a bigger pair of balls than most men in the Seven Kingdoms, Theon commented from where he stood on the other side of the tent, his arms crossed and his ever-present smirk on his face. Theon had brought her to Rob's tent and ordered an infirmary nurse to treat her. The nurse had helped her out of the leather armor and then cut off the sleeve of her shirt to protect her modesty and gain access to her arm. That's not exactly difficult to do, Malia retorted, rolled her eyes then wincing as one of the women who ran the infirmary finished stitching up her arm, which surprisingly didn't look as terrible as it felt, and began to bandage it. You know you're in some serious shit, right? Theon continued, sounding completely unconcerned. You should have seen the look on Rob's face when he realized that you not only were fighting in the battle but were dueling against the Kingslayer. That was some fancy fighting, by the way. Not many people would last that long against him. It was incredibly stupid, that's what it was. Rob was suddenly standing at the entrance to his tent and the look on his face was thunderous. Leave us. Both of you. Theon sent her a sympathetic look as the nurse bowed her head to Rob before they left, and then it was just the two of them. Nerves fluttered through her stomach and Malia had to fight the urge to fidget uncomfortably. All right, I know that you're furious with me. Furious? Rob repeated in a strained voice, his blue eyes flashing. I am so beyond furious with you, Malia. You disobeyed me again, putting your life in danger again. His voice rose several octaves and with it her own temper. Why can't you just do as you're told? Because I don't follow orders, Rob, least of all from you. Malia snapped, leaping to her feet and curling her hands into fists, ignoring the sharp pain in her arm as she did so. How many times do we have to go through this? She yelled, wanting to shake him. We are supposed to be partners in this marriage. How are we supposed to be partners when you lie to me and go behind my back? He bit back, voice rising as he strode across the room towards her. How am I supposed to trust you, when I'm constantly worried that you'll do something stupid and put yourself in danger? I'm only trying to protect you, Malia, to keep you safe. And I need you to be safe. She shouted, interrupting him once more. I couldn't stand being left behind at Winterfell while you were out here fighting, not knowing whether you were alive or dead. I would drive myself insane thinking about it and I had nightmares of your death. Malia. No, you're going to shut up and listen for once, Malia ordered, shoving him back so that he was forced to sit on the bed as she began to pace in front of him, trying desperately to gather her thoughts. This wasn't how she pictured doing this, but she needed to make him understand. You left me, Rob, you told me that you loved me and then you left. You have to understand that love was never something that I wanted or expected with our arranged marriage, and you caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond and I didn't know what to think for a long time. And then I couldn't sleep without you holding me, I couldn't stop worrying about you and what you were doing. You consumed my every thought, Rob, and it wasn't until I saw you die in that dream that I realized what had happened. I would rather risk my life here with you, by your side, than live a half-life without you because I love you, you stupid wolf, she cried, throwing up her hands in exasperation. Rob slowly stood, looking stunned, and Malia felt all the fight leaving her body, feeling as if a weight had been lifted off her. Maybe love is a risk, she murmured, walking up to him and putting her hands on his chest. But it's a risk that I am willing to take. I never thought I would, never thought I could love someone like this, but I fell in love with you. I fought it. It's the first battle I didn't mind losing. The anger was erased from Rob's face, and this time his eyes blazed with triumph, a look of awe and wonder etched on his face. His right hand tenderly brushed against her cheek, the other sneaking around her waist to pull her closer. I have missed you so much, princess, he murmured in a hoarse voice, bending down to kiss her. Malia pushed against his chest, evading his lips as she quirked an eyebrow, looking up at him and feeling happier than she could ever remember. Her body felt light and warm and she couldn't believe that her heart felt so full. Is that all? She teased, unable to stop herself from smiling. His eyes were full of warmth and love as his fingers clutched at her hips and he said what she needed to hear. I love you, you stubborn, impossible woman, he told her in an anguished, honest voice. In an all-consuming way that completely defies reason. Ragnar, Malia murmured, linking her hands behind Rob's head and lifting herself onto her tiptoes and sighing contentedly as his lips met hers. They had defeated the Kingslayer and they were reunited once more together. There was nothing that they couldn't accomplish. Chapter 16, King in the North. His fingers dug into the sides of his wife's thighs, gritting his teeth against the overwhelming pleasure and trying desperately to hold back as she rode him, lifting and rolling her hips in the most erotic way. He could feel how close she was in the way she fluttered around him, in how her nails dug into his chest and the way her throaty moans grew louder. He loved how uninhibited she was when they were like this, her noises unchecked and every movement performed because she wanted to, not because she was trying to impress him. "Rob," she whimpered throatily, her eyelashes fluttering. A growl rumbled deep in his chest as her expressive brown eyes disappeared and he suddenly sat up, surprising her as he fisted his hand in the hair on the back of her neck, wrenching her head back and causing her eyes to shoot open again. He held them for a second, watching as he began to lift his hips to match her thrusts. "Yes," she hissed, her forehead tilting down to meet his own, her hands sliding up his neck to grasp either side of his face, her lips crashing down to his hungrily. Sweat clung to their bodies as their pace grew even faster, each of them driving the other higher and higher until finally, they both plummeted over the edge. Rob swallowed her surprised cry as she fell apart before following her, his eyes clenched shut, a groan in his throat as white spots danced behind his eyelids. He didn't remember collapsing back against the pillows. Both of them must have passed out for a few moments, because when Rob became aware of his surroundings again, Malia was sprawled across his chest, their legs tangled as the sweat began to dry on their skin. Heart still galloping in his chest, Rob lazily pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I've missed you," he murmured, smiling slightly as he ran his fingers through her hair. He felt her eyelashes flutter against his chest as her eyes opened, turning her head so she could look up at him. She propped her chin on her hands, her eyes twinkling happily. "And I love you," she whispered almost shyly, completely different to how she first told him just a couple hours ago. His smile widened, still hardly daring to believe that this was real and this was happening. "I love you too, Malia, even if you are the most stubborn, infuriating woman that I have ever met," he teased lightly, even though his words were true. "Then it seems we are a perfect match," Malia responded, giving him a significant look and making him roll his eyes. She sighed heavily. "So I can assume that you are still mad at me?" Wanting desperately to avoid another fight, Rob cast his mind around to figure out a way to explain his thoughts without upsetting either one of them. "I'm frustrated," he corrected, frowning as he thought. "I know that way of life in Dawn is different than here, but women do not typically fight on the battlefield, Malia. Just the thought of having you out there, in danger, terrifies me." Rhaenys and Visenya Targaryen fought alongside their brother Aegon when they conquered Westeros, Malia countered, looking a little annoyed but struggling to keep her voice even. Rob quirked an eyebrow. "That was 3 centuries ago," he reminded her gently. "And they were riding dragons," he chuckled, shaking his head. "Do you have a dragon hidden somewhere that you're not telling me about?" "Yes. Of course not." Malia scoffed quickly. "What about Mage Mormont and her daughter Daisy?" She countered immediately. "They are both very capable fighters and women, in case you haven't noticed." "Seven hells, Rob, you've made Lady Mormont one of the commanders in your army." "That's different," Rob insisted firmly. "All of the women of Bear Island have to learn to protect themselves from the raiding Ironborn while their men are away. They are the exception." "Well, maybe they shouldn't be," Malia cried, pushing off his chest and sitting up. Rob was saddened to see that despite his best efforts she had become agitated anyway. He was even more saddened to see her wrap the sheet around herself and hide her body from his view. "Did you know that my uncle Oberyn has taught of each of his 8 daughters to fight?" she asked him, getting herself worked up as she kneeled on the bed next to him. "When he went to go claim my cousin Oberyn, her mother did not want him to take her," she cried, and he threw a spear at Oberyn's feet. He pointed to both of them and asked which weapon she would choose. She picked up the spear, Rob. He just blinked at her, not comprehending the importance of the story, and she huffed. "How can I make you understand this?" she muttered, an adorable crease forming between her eyebrows as she thought. "Fighting is to me what being the heir to Winterfell is to you. It's a part of who I am, it's a part of my identity. I am not the type of woman to stay meekly in the tent while you're off fighting the battles. It's like me asking you to allow Bran be to Lord of Winterfell in your place." Rob nodded slowly. "I think I think I understand where you're coming from, Malia. She sighed again, the fight draining out of her. But it doesn't change how you feel about it, she concluded, her voice heavy. I don't want to fight again, Rob told her, sitting up and reaching for her, his hands sliding down her arms as he coaxed her to lie back down with him. This night has been too perfect for that. I'm going to change your mind about this, Malia promised, reluctantly allowing him to pull her close again, her head on his chest and one of her legs entwined with his. One of these days we're going to be fighting the Lannisters side by side. Rob didn't think that day would ever come, but he wasn't about to tell her that. He decided it was time to change the subject. Where did you get these? He asked in concern, turning her arm over to reveal 4 semi-healed scratches down her forearm. Malia fell silent, gently running a hand over the scratches. Malia. I failed, Rob, she confessed in a whisper, sounding genuinely upset. I messed up in a very large way and I don't think I will be able to fix it. Rob's concern was growing at the tone of her voice. What happened, Malia? I promised Rickon that I wouldn't leave Winterfell, she told him in a soft voice. He overheard me telling Bran and Mayor Stillowin about my decision to join you before I was able to tell him. He was so mad, Rob. He was yelling, he called me a liar, and when I tried to explain myself to him I must have gotten too close because Shaggy did this to you. Rob interrupted sharply, alarm running through him as he sat up slightly, shifting her so he could see her face. I know Rickon and Shaggy had been a little wild when I had left, but I cannot believe he attacked you. He was feeding off of Rickon's anger and fear, Rob, Malia told him gently. Shaggy was just warning me away. I don't blame either of them for 1 second, this was entirely my fault. She shook her head and looked down. Rob could have sworn he glimpsed a sheen of tears in her eyes. I handled the whole thing poorly and now I'm not sure if Rickon will ever forgive me. He will, Rob told her, lifting her chin with 2 fingers. Once we rescue my father and my sisters and go back home, he will understand. A single tear trickled down her cheek as she looked at him, and he was surprised by how torn up she was about this. He knew that she had become very close to Rickon since she had arrived at Winterfell, but it seemed as if her heart was breaking. You didn't see his face? Rob was at a loss for words. He sat there silently for a moment, unsure what to say to make her feel better other than to wait until they get home so they could talk to Rickon. I'll write to Mayor Stillowin and check in on both Rickon and Bran, he reassured her, gathering her in his arms once more. I'm sorry that this happened, Malia. I'm sorry that all of this is happening. Believe me, I would very much rather be home at Winterfell with my entire family and focusing on creating our own little family. Malia stilled in his arms. Our own little family. She repeated. He didn't seem notice that her voice was higher pitched than usual. Of course, Rob smiled, rubbing his hand along her bare back, his other hand folded behind his head. Have you realized that it's been nearly a year since we've been married? He asked, hardly able to believe it himself. My mother always tells me how I was conceived on their wedding night, but I suppose it differs for everyone. Maybe it's for the best that you're not with child yet, Rob mused out loud, looking up at the ceiling of the tent. Because you know what this means, don't you? He swiftly flipped her over, slipping between her legs and hovering over her. It just means we'll have to keep trying, every free moment that we get, he murmured, grinning before burying his face in her neck. Malia couldn't help but laugh at his over-exaggerated attempts, even though half of her was panicking and ready to flee. She grabbed the sides of his face and pulled him away, her eyes flickering between his, a question on her face. You're ready for children? She asked hesitantly, silently praying that his answer was no. Even with everything that's going on? Well, sure, I think so. Rob's smile faded slightly at the serious expression on her face, and he took the time to honestly answer her question. I mean, the thought of being a father is more than a little terrifying. To be in charge for a little life, to take care of them and raise them is a huge responsibility. But I want to create a child with you. A son with your brown eyes or a daughter with your smile. Can't you picture it? No, Malia wanted to yell. I'm not ready to become a mother. I'm not ready to put aside my plans. There are still so many things I have finish. Still so many people who have to pay for what they have done to my family. I don't, she stammered, not knowing how to respond without lying outright. Rob seemed not to hear her. He drew back a little, his eyes troubled. While we're talking about this, there's something I should probably tell you. Now, I don't want you to get mad, and you should keep in mind that I did what was needed. There was no other way. Malia frowned up at him, pretty sure she wasn't going to like where this was going. Why would I be mad? Malia asked slowly, trying to read his face. What did you do? He sighed heavily, shifting off her. In order to cross the Trident, Lord Free has demanded certain things from us. Benna mentioned that he exacts tolls on those who wish to cross. Malia muttered, feeling apprehensive. What did you have to pay? A squire, a few wards at Winterfell, a marriage betrothal for Arya and Rickon, and... He trailed off, watching her reaction as if he was waiting for her to explode. When our firstborn son reaches his 10th name-a-day, he will be sent to be fostered at the Twins. Malia's mouth opened and closed several times, flabbergasted as she tried to shift through her initial feelings. Outrage was her first reaction. You sold our future son, she accused, her voice quietly furious. There was a delayed second reaction that questioned her anger, the small voice reminding her that she didn't want children right now anyway. It was all very confusing. To the Frizz. It was the only way for the army to cross. Robb repeated, holding his hands out to the sides. If we had said no, then we would have been too late to save the Riverlands. But that's going to be our son, Robb, our child. Malia exclaimed loudly, sitting up as well. Shut up, the small voice shouted. Why are you getting so upset? I don't want to only have him for 10 years and then lose him. Neither do I. Robb insisted heatedly. I hate everything about this deal. But I'm responsible for the 20,000 men in my army as well as all their families back home. I have to think of them before I can think of our hypothetical son. Believe me, I know the importance of negotiating alliances and deals, Malia reminded him. I was used as a pawn to broker an alliance between Dorne and Winterfell, as were you. But more than that, my brother Quentyn was sent off to be fostered when he was very young. I barely remember him, but I do remember how it tore my mother apart, day after day, year after year, until she eventually left my father. I don't want that to happen to us. It won't, Robb reassured her, moving closer and grabbing both her hands. Wheel. She never heard what he was about to say because he was interrupted by the abrupt appearance of none other than Theon Greyjoy. Malia yelped and Robb cursed, practically tackling her and yanking the sheet up higher around them to protect their modesty. What the fuck, Greyjoy? Robb shouted, attempting to shield her with his body as he turned to glare at his friend. You can't just enter someone's tent without announcing yourself. There's been a raven from King's Landing, Theon interrupted. Malia felt her body tense as she took in the uncharacteristically grave expression on Theon's face, and Robb must have noticed it too because he sat up. The sheet fell down around his waist as he took the rolled-up parchment that Theon walked over and handed to him. Robb? Malia questioned softly, watching him unroll the letter and read it over and over again, his face going pale. She shifted to her knees next to him, making sure the sheet was completely covering her body. Is everything all right? It's bad news, isn't it? Theon guessed, his voice solemn. We haven't heard from them in a while. Robb was still alarmingly silent, and Malia was pretty sure that besides his eyes, he hadn't moved a single muscle since he opened the letter. What is it, Robb? Malia urged gently, heart beginning to beat quicker as she braced herself for what he was going to say. What do they want? Instead of answering them, Robb stood up, uncaring of his nudity as the letter fluttered from his fingers. Malia watched his stiff, mechanical movements with worried eyes as he went to put on the pants and shirt that she had stripped off him just hours ago. Malia and Theon shared an alarmed glance as Robb stepped into his boots without lacing them. Robb, just wait a minute, tell us what's going on, Theon spoke up, trying to put a hand on Robb's shoulder. Robb shrugged him off before walking out of the tent without even bothering to put his cloak on. What in the seven hells does that letter say? Theon demanded roughly, trying to cover up his confusion and concern. Malia hesitantly reached for the letter, a little scared of what she might read. Refusing to acknowledge the fact that her fingers were trembling, she picked it up and began to read. Her breath grew shallower with every word until she stopped breathing altogether, feeling dizzy as her mind tried to discover all the implications of what she read. She looked up at Theon, her eyes wide. Lord Stark is dead, she told him, voice cracking. King Joffrey had him beheaded as a traitor to the crown. Doran watched his brother restlessly pace the length of the throne room, his continually growing frustration only serving to make him weary. His gout was steadily growing worse, his joints all red and inflamed. He now needed a stick in order to walk, which was why he had ultimately made the decision to move to the Water Gardens, where his enemies couldn't see how weak he was growing. He loved this peaceful and serene palace. There were fountains and pools for the children to play in, blood orange trees that offered a delicious scent and a soft sea breeze that made the thin curtains flutter. I don't know how many more times we have to go over this, Doran Oberyn snarled, the rage leaking into his voice. You have read this letter just as many times as I have. The wolves have begun to gather, the entire pack marching away from its home. I pray every day that the sun will guide them in the right direction and keep them safe. Oberyn threw the now flat and well-read piece of parchment at Doran, who caught it, looking down at his daughter's elegant writing. The Starks are marching to war with the entire north at its back. That's Marliar's family now. Her husband is marching to war, and if I know Marliar, she's made it so that she's right there next to him. We are the sun, Doran, she's asking us for our help. We cannot turn her away. We cannot sit here and do nothing. That is not what I'm suggesting, Doran responded, appearing calm in the face of his brother's anger. I would never just abandon Marliar when she needed us the most, but I needed some time to think about what our safest move will be. You must understand that every decision I make must be made for the good of Dorne. If we give outward support for the Starks, if we go against the Crown and the Lannisters, then we are putting every one of our people in danger. We will be labeled an enemy and a traitor, and our allies would be too far away to aid us if need be. Then what do you suggest? Oberyn demanded, finally stopping his pacing and turning to face him with his arms crossed. A knock sounded on the door. Enter, Doran called, turning his gaze away from his brother. Areo Hotter partially opened the door and poked his head through. Apologies for interrupting, my prince. The princess is here as well as a few of her cousins. They wish to speak with you. Doran sighed. Please inform them that I am in the middle of a very important meeting and do not wish to be disturbed. Father, you've been locked in that room with Uncle Oberyn for a fortnight now. Arianne shouted through the door, trying to peer around Areo's large body. We know that you've received a letter from Marliar despite the fact that you've been trying to keep it a secret. What is going on? They have a right to know, Oberyn murmured to Doran when he stayed silent. It's better that they hear it from us than from somebody else. Reluctantly nodding his head in agreement, Doran waved the girls inside. Arianne entered first, her dress swirling about her ankles, with Oberyn, Nymeria and Tyen right behind her. Even the way the Sand Snakes dressed showed the unique differences between them. Oberyn with her warrior-style outfit, her whip tied to her belt. Nymeria with her simple dress, which probably concealed about half a dozen knives, and Tyen, the picture of sweetness and innocence in a pale blue gown. All three deadly in their own way, and together a force to be reckoned with. Arianne glided over to her father, examining his expression for a moment before bending down to kiss his cheek. She took the seat next to him while Nymeria perched on the arm of the chair. Tyen settled on a chair across from them, but Oberyn remained standing, her arms crossed and her expression stony. What is it, father? Arianne asked, tucking her hair behind her ear. What did Marliar say? The Lannisters have imprisoned Eddard Stark for being a traitor and are holding his two daughters captive in King's Landing. In response, Marliar's husband has mobilized the northern armies and are marching south, Doran informed them in a heavy voice. Their reaction was immediate and explosive. Is Marliar marching with them? Arianne questioned, leaning forward. What reason did they give for calling Lord Stark a traitor? Asked Nymeria. Oberyn shared her father's quick temper and her mouth was set in a snarl. Who do these fucking Lannisters think they are? When do we march? Tyen asked expectantly, her wide eyes looking between her father and her uncle. Oberyn raised a hand to silence them. There are things that still need to be considered, Oberyn announced, glancing over at Doran, who gave him a small, appreciative nod, glad that he saw his point of view for the moment. While we can't declare our support for the Starks outright, we also won't leave Marliar without help. We have to send men to help them, Oberyn persisted, her hand straying to the whip on her waist. We forged an alliance with the Starks when Malyar married the heir to Winterfell, and that means both men and resources. We can't send them right up the middle of Westeros, Arianne added, turning to her cousins as they began to develop a plan, ignoring the two men in the room, one a seasoned warrior and the other a seasoned ruler. Doran watched them with a small smile on his face, enjoying watching the girls defend their cousin. Our army would have to pass Highgarden, King's Landing, and Riverrun in order to reach the north. What if they were disguised? Tyen suggested, her eyes lighting up. Nondescript clothing, no banners and no sun and spear. Those are all exceptional ideas, Doran complimented, tilting his head toward them. And all of you are right. After many days and nights of deliberation, I have decided that we will send 5,000 men to aid the Starks against the Lannisters. They will travel by sea, sailing around the coast out of sight, undisguised until they meet up with the Northern Army. 5,000. Nymeria repeated, sounding disappointed with the number. Will that be enough? It is all I can spare, I'm afraid, Doran sighed. It is a very fine line that we are going to walk. All of Westeros knows that Malyar married the young wolf. We don't want the crown to think that we are traitors, so we can't vocally support the Starks just yet, but we will be secretly aiding them. It is only a matter of time before word about it gets out, but I want to forestall it as long as possible. And when they do find out, I'm going to need as many men here as possible in case we are attacked. I cannot leave Dorne undefended. Who will command the army? Arianne asked her father. I will, Oberyn announced before Doran could answer, but he had to admit that he wasn't surprised. Oberyn and Malyar shared a special bond while she grew up here in Dorne. While Doran suspected that most of it had to do with the fact that she was Elya's daughter, it was also the girl herself. Oberyn taught her and doted on her more so than any of his own daughters. He adored Malyar, and Doran knew there was no way that he would let her fight this war on her own. He immediately felt reassured that Oberyn would be there to protect Malyar, and there was a weight lifted off his shoulders. I will go with you, Father Tyen declared immediately, rising gracefully from her seat. Gone was the innocent expression on her face, and in its place was a dangerous one that reminded him so much of her father. Malyar is like a sister to me, there is no way that I am allowing those fucking Lannisters to hurt her or her new family. We have to protect her, Nymeria agreed, flicking her long braid over her shoulder. But if we're going to go through with this plan, we can't have too many of us going where we can be easily recognized. I will stay here and help protect our home. They all looked to Oberyn, who ended up surprising them the most. I will stay here as well. I will also continue to train Tristan and the younger Sand Snakes. They have to be prepared for whatever is coming. I'm glad you will be staying here, cousins, Arianne said, reaching out to take Oberyn's hand briefly and smiling at Nymeria. A part of me wishes that I could fight so that I could come with you all if it meant that I could see Malyar. I've missed her something dreadful. Make sure you give her my love. We will, Tyen promised. Gather your best men and assemble your army, Oberyn, Doran commanded in a deep voice. You sail north the day after tomorrow. Lord Stark is dead. Her husband's father and the father of 6 other children was dead. The only other person besides her 2 uncles that knew her secret, dead. She repeated it over and over in her mind, but that didn't seem to make it sink in any faster. Lord Stark was a good man, an honorable man. What could he possibly have done to be labeled a traitor to the crown? Now fully dressed, Malyar sat on the edge of the bed, the letter still in her hands. She knew that she should find Robb or Lady Stark, offer them words of consolation that she knew would be meaningless to them. She just couldn't believe that the Lannisters had once again murdered a part of her family. Once again, they had taken away someone that she cared about and hurt the people that she had grown to love. Her hand unconsciously clenched into a fist, crumpling the letter. She knew that this wasn't the work of Tywin Lannister this time, it was that awful boy King Joffrey and his mother. The whole family was terrible, and Malyar found herself questioning whether she had misread Lord Tyrion as well. Sighing, with a heavy heart, Malyar stood and put the letter on the table before pulling out the bag she hidden in the tent and taking out the flask with the moon tea and taking a long swig from it, grimacing slightly. "My lady," Theon called from outside the tent. She hurriedly put everything away before moving several steps to sit back on the bed. "It's all right, Theon, you can come in," Malyar called back, lacing her fingers together. "Well, did you find him?" Theon nodded, still uncharacteristically silent. Malia had never seen him without his smirk for so long. Word has somehow spread throughout the camp already. Robb grabbed his sword and has gone into the forest. People kept going up to him and saying they were sorry for his loss. Malia sighed, looking down at her hands. I suppose I should go find him and tell him. She trailed off, looking up at Theon with uncertain, lost eyes. What do I tell him? What could I possibly say to a man who just lost his father, someone he looked up to, loved and admired more than anyone else? Theon scoffed, rolling his eyes uncomfortably and laughing off her question. I don't fucking know, my father is still alive. Come on, Theon, be serious. Malia chided, frowning up at him. I've never lost a parent like Robb has. She partially lied. She had actually lost both her parents, and while it hurt terribly, she hadn't been as close to them as Robb had been to his father. I don't know what to say either, but as his wife I'm supposed to comfort him. I just thought that since you've been his best friend for longer than I've been his wife. She broke off, shaking her head and sighing. Never mind. I don't know what I was thinking. She stood, brushing out the skirts of her dress and moving towards the exit. I should go find Robb. With Robb, actions speak louder than words, Theon blurted as she drew level with him. He rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortably when she turned to look at him in surprise. I don't think there is anything that you can say that will make him feel better. My advice would be to just be there for him, I guess. He shrugged, lifting a shoulder. Malia gave him a small smile, reaching out to put a hand on Theon's arm. I know we haven't always gotten along, Theon, but thank you, she murmured gratefully, turning to leave again. Malia, Theon called before she walked out. She paused, looking over her shoulder quizzically. Did Robb tell you about the deal he had to make at the Twins? He asked, shifting on his feet awkwardly. Yes, she nodded, looking troubled once more. He told me what he had to pay. You can't let him go through with it, Theon suddenly exclaimed, cutting her off and making her blink in surprise. You can't give your son to the Freys. Theon. You need to be the one to raise him yourself, Theon insisted, and Malia had never heard him sound more passionate about anything. He will be the heir to Winterfell one day, and the Freys are a lesser house. It's practically an insult. I know my situation is different, but I haven't seen my family in 9 years, and your son deserves better than that. If you don't want to send your son to the Twins, I just want you to know that I'm on your side. Malia could have fallen over in shock. She had to force her jaw from flopping open, reminding herself of Theon's current situation. He was a ward himself. Not voluntarily, true, but at least he had grown up with a family like the Starks. Her future son would not be so fortunate. Wow, Theon, she stammered, completely blown away. Thank you, I really appreciate that. And so does my unborn, hypothetical son. Sure, Theon answered gruffly, looking slightly embarrassed as he waved her gratitude away. You should go find Robb now. He can be pretty impulsive when he's angry and upset. She sent him a small smile before pushing aside the tent flap. Greywind was pacing around right outside the tent, looking anxious. He could tell that something was wrong, and as soon as she stepped outside, she could as well. The camp, which was normally a bustle of activity, cursing and the sound of swords and shields, was abnormally silent. Even the horses were quieter than usual. He padded over to her, pushing his nose against her hand with a soft whine. Malia pulled her cloak tighter around her and crouched down next to him, scratching behind his ears. Hi, Grey, she murmured, no longer unnerved by the fact that he could understand every word that she was saying. You can sense that something's wrong with Robb, can't you, boy? She pressed a kiss on the top of his head. Come on, let's go find him. Greywind bounded off immediately through the camp, turning around every once in a while to make sure she was still following. The men were silent as she passed, bowing their heads and murmuring words of condolences. She accepted the words as graciously as she could, slightly surprised that they were extending their respect to include her. Malia paused at one point while walking through the camp, her head turning towards the section where they kept all their prisoners. From here she could see the outline of Jaime Lannister, who was cuffed and chained to a pole. Hot, swooping anger flushed through her body at the mere sight of him. When would that family stop terrorizing the rest of the Seven Kingdoms? While she knew that he had nothing to do with Lord Stark's death, he was their prime suspect for Bran's fall. He had murdered her grandfather and he was related to Tywin Lannister. Her mind drifted to the gift that Tywin had given her before she left Dorne. One drop of the long farewell on his skin and he would die a slow, painful death. It would all be worth it. She could imagine the looks on Tywin and Cersei Lannister's face when they learned that he was dead. It would be one last Lannister in Westeros. Who knows how many lives she would save with this one, small, untraceable act. She turned with her eyes narrowed, to go back to her tent and get the poison, but before she could, Grey Wind came up behind her and gave her a small nudge. She blinked and jumped, the murderous rage clearing from her mind as she looked down at the direwolf. Right, Malia stammered, shaking her head slightly. Lead on, Grey Wind. Grey Wind steered her out of the camp and a short distance into the surrounding forest. She heard Robb first, and when she stepped between the trees she saw him hacking at a nearby tree with his sword. He was still wearing the clothes he had slipped on before he had walked out of the tent, his boots unlaced and his shirt hanging open. The trees had deep cuts in it, his muscles straining as he used his full strength with each swing. Tears were streaming down his face, his chest heaving, and for a moment Malia felt like crying herself. Grey Wind whined again. Robb. Malia called hesitantly, walking a few steps closer. He didn't seem to hear her, he was so wrapped up in his attack on the tree. Robb. She shouted a bit louder to break through to him. He abruptly stopped swinging, his eyes finding hers. An expression of utter devastation and loss covered his face, the look in his normally bright blue eyes was dead and empty. In that moment the fight seemed to leave him, his shoulders slumped and the ruined sword slipping from his fingers. He swayed dangerously and Malia rushed forward, falling on her knees to catch him as he fell to his. He buried his head in her neck, a shuddering sob echoing in her ear. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, one hand at the back of his neck and the other rubbing soothing circles on his back. She held him as tight as she could, trying to pour all of her love and comfort into her embrace. Grey Wind circled them a couple times, nudging his nose against Robb's tear-streaked face. Robb made a noise that sounded like a combination of a gasp and a chuckle and pulled back slightly, petting Grey Wind on the head. Malia wiped Robb's tears with her thumbs when he turned back to her, her hands then sliding to either side of his neck. Robb closed his eyes, his own hands coming up to grasp her wrists, looking like he was trying to take comfort from her touch. When he opened his eyes again, the hopelessness in them scared her. "I failed," he whispered, dazed. "I called all of my banners, created an army of 20,000 men to march to King's Landing and save my father, and I failed." His eyes slowly drifted to hers. "I promised Bran and Rickon that I would bring father home. How can I possibly go back to face them now?" he asked in despair, shaking his head as his eyes filled with tears. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." "Yes you are," Malia countered fiercely, making sure she had his complete and undivided attention. "You are strong enough for this, Robb," she repeated. "And when you're not, you have me." Robb swallowed loudly, nodding hesitantly. His gaze drifted to something over her shoulder and suddenly that look of despair was back on his face. "Mother," he murmured, brokenly. Malia glanced behind her and saw Lady Stark standing there, a similar look on her face even though her eyes were devoid of tears. She didn't know how long Lady Stark was standing there watching them, but Malia could have sworn she caught an odd expression on her face. Was that jealousy she saw? But as quick as it came it was gone and Malia was left wondering if she imagined it. The moment passed and then Malia was helping Robb back to his feet as his mother rushed forward to embrace him. Malia made to step back, not wanting to intrude on this delicate, intimate family moment, but Robb suddenly held her hand, stopping her from moving any further away from him. He hugged his mother with one arm and clutched at her with the other, holding so tightly that it hurt. "I'll kill them all," Robb vowed in a choked voice, his voice slightly muffled by his mother's cloak. "Every one of them. I'll kill them all." "They have your sisters," Lady Stark reminded him gently, brushing down his curls. "First we have to get the girls back. And then we will kill them all," she finished furiously, her eyes opening and landing on Malia. "They won't get away with this," Malia chimed in, her voice dark. "The Lannisters will pay for everything that they've done." Cersei stared out of her bedchamber window into dark, night sky, leaning against the wall with her robe loosely tied around her body. She took another sip of wine from the cup she was holding, her mind drifting as it always seemed to do lately, to Malia Martell. The girl was a thorn in her side. Every small council meeting, Cersei was just waiting to hear the news that Rhaenys Targaryen was back from the dead and was claiming the Iron Throne. News of Eddard Stark's death must have reached them by now. What better way to respond than by revealing her true identity? Cersei didn't understand why the foolish girl was continuing to keep her identity a secret, but frankly she could care less. The less people who knew about the girl's identity, the better for Cersei and her family. Ever since her by-chance realization that Malia Martell might not be who she said she was, Cersei had been doing some subtle inquiring about her, and what she found out was troubling. The girl had been sick for the first 2 years of her life and hadn't been seen in public, which she thought was oddly convenient. She was the twin of Doran's middle child who was being fostered at the Huron Woods. She was beautiful and loved by her people. Cersei fought the urge to roll her eyes. There was no definitive evidence that the girl was who she said she was, and no evidence that she wasn't. It mattered not. All that mattered was the safety of her family, and this Malia girl threatened Joffrey himself. She had to die, there was no other option. A small, hidden smile crossed her lips. The best part about all of this was that Cersei was going to take care of this little problem on her own. Jaime and their father were off fighting their battles, and Cersei neither knew nor cared where the treacherous little imp was. She would prove to all of them that she was capable of doing more than just giving birth to children. She had given a lot of thought as to who should help solve her little Targaryen problem. The Faceless Men were the first to pop into her mind. They were professional and they were discreet, but ultimately the price for the job would most likely be exorbitant. Not only was the girl a princess, but she was holed up in a castle all the way north, surrounded by the remaining Stark army. She didn't need Littlefinger or Varys prying into where all the money was going, so she dismissed that idea. She chose to go with her second plan, which was to pick someone close to the girl, someone who can access her relatively easily. She ran through the Stark bannermen whose castles were near Winterfell, dismissing the unfailingly loyal ones such as the Karstarks, the Umbers, the Mormonts, the Reeds and the Glovers. Then one name jumped out at her, one that had a long, bitter history with the Starks. With the right words and the right incentive, Cersei knew that she could sway the man to her side. She had seen firsthand how the offer of a woman, of money or of land could make a man do something he never thought he would do. Her smile grew. Cersei was going to give the man an offer he couldn't refuse. If he helped take care of her Targaryen problem and aided in the downfall of the Starks, she would anoint him as Lord Paramount of the North, something that his family had wanted for a long, long time. "Come back to bed," love, a voice called from behind her. Irritation crossed Cersei's face as he interrupted her musings. It was the wrong voice, the wrong face, the wrong body. A wave of longing swept through her and she found herself missing Jaime all over again. Sex with Lancel was nowhere near as satisfying as sex with Jaime. He just didn't feel the same inside her. He curbed the urges for now, but Cersei could already feel herself growing annoyed and bored with how infatuated and arrogant Lancel was becoming. "Leave me," Cersei commanded, turning from the window and gliding over to her table to sit on the chair, taking another sip of wine before taking out a quill and a piece of parchment. "I have work to do." Lancel looked disappointed and surprised, but slowly put his clothes back on, hesitating in front of the table before he left. "Will I see you later?" he asked, voice rising hopefully. "Perhaps," Cersei drawled, unconcerned without even looking up at him. She took another sip of wine when she finally heard the door open and close and began to focus on crafting her letter. Malia sat next to her husband, surveying the arguing men around her. Robb had come to find her that night, hours after the sun had set. The expression on his face was grave as he told her that Renly Baratheon was claiming his brother's crown and he was going to call an emergency council to figure out their next move. Benches were set up outside, a fair distance from the camp so that they wouldn't be overhead. She sat silently, listening intently as the lords argued back and forth. Malia sat with Robb, Lady Stark and Theon on the northern side with the Great Jon, Galbart Glover, Lady Mormont and Lord Karstark. Her eyes lingering on him for a moment, taking in his hollow eyes and tangled beard, a pang of pity running through her. He had lost 2 of his sons in their last battle and he wasn't taking the loss well. On the other side of their group were the southern lords, most of whom she didn't recognize. They had already been at this for well over an hour now, and they didn't seem to be any closer to making a final decision. There was arguing, there was yelling and cursing, and there was frustration. The same points were mentioned again and again. Lord Tywine had crossed the Trident and were heading for Harrenhal. And now there were two kings in the realm, Joffrey Baratheon and his uncle Renly. Some lords wanted to march towards Harrenhal and end Lord Tywin's power once and for all. Others suggested hitting his home of Casterly Rock. Still others suggested pledging their fealty to King Renly, adding their forces to his and then marching on King's Landing. Marliar glanced at Robb occasionally throughout the proceedings. He hadn't spoken a word since the council started, yet there was a thoughtful look on his face as he respectfully listened to each and every one of his lords. He was holding up as well as could be expected since the news of his father's death. He was slightly more distant than Marliar had ever seen him, but she did not blame him for attempting to keep busy. He was stronger than she was and was handling this better than she ever would have. Her respect for him had grown exponentially over the past few days. Renly is not the king, she heard Robb say loudly, speaking up for the first time and jerking her back to the present. You cannot mean to hold to Joffrey, my lord, Galbart Glover protested, looking outraged. He put your father to the death. That makes him evil, Robb pointed out. Not a king. Bran cannot be Lord of Winterfell before me, Renly cannot be king before Stannis. He was Robert's younger brother. The council erupted once more. Lady Mormont agreed that Stannis had the better claim, but Sir Mark Piper argued that Renly was crowned and that if they added their strength to his, they could potentially have 6 of the 7 kingdoms. One of the Freys, of course, suggested they wait and see who comes out on the winning side, and everybody positively went mad with disgust and anger. Lady Stark stood up at one point on the other side of Robb, and every person in the council respectfully fell silent. Why not a peace? She asked in a calm voice. There was a long, heavy silence following her words as everyone moved their gaze to Robb to see his reaction. Marliar could tell right away that he did not agree with her decision, and he let it be known. They murdered my lord father, your husband, Robb reminded her, his face grim. He reached for his sword and unsheathed it, holding it in front of him. This is the only peace I mean to give the Lannisters. The Great Jon led the cheering, pounding the benches and stamping their feet in approval. Lady Stark waited, her face impassive, until the clearing was silent once more. Her voice filled with grief. She went on to say that everyone that they had lost was gone, and no amount of fighting was going to bring them back. I will mourn for Ned until the end of my days, but I must think of the living. I want my daughters back, and the Queen holds them still. If I must trade our 4 Lannisters for their 2 Starks, I will call that a bargain and thank the golds. I want you safe, Robb, ruling at Winterfell from your father's seat with your wife by your side. I want you to live your life, to father sons and daughters, and I want to write an end to this. I want to go home, my lords, and weep for my husband. Marliar's first reaction to Lady Stark's passionate speech was disgust and a little bit of panic. This can't be the end, she thought frantically, her eyes flickering around the clearing to gauge everybody's reaction to what Lady Stark was saying. I am so close to finally moving against the Lannisters, this can't end now. Not when I'm closer than I've ever been before. Thankfully, it seemed as if all the other lords wanted vengeance as well. Lord Karstark wanted his son's death to mean something, another lord questioned how long the peace would last, and the southern lords pointed out that the mountain had ravaged their homes and slaughtered their people. What would be the point of pulling back now? There was one thing that most of the lords seemed to agree with. Nobody would ever call a Lannister their king. Marliar had to bite the inside of her cheek to stop the wide smile that threatened to spill across her face. Lady Stark, defeated, sat back down on the bench looking disappointed, and the Great Jon then lurched to his feet. His eyes were alight and a strange sort of electricity was suddenly running through the air, making Marliar's heart pump as the adrenaline spread through her body. My lords! He roared, spreading his arms wide and spinning in a slow circle to look at them all. Here is what I say to these 2 kings. He spat and a few of them cheered. Renly Baratheon is nothing to me, nor Stannis neither. Why should they rule over me and mine from some flowery seat in the south? What do they know of the wall or the Wolf's Wood? Even their gods are wrong. He reached over his shoulder and pulled his giant 2-handed great sword free. Why shouldn't we rule ourselves again? It was the dragons we married, and all the dragons are dead. There was more cheering at this point and Malia was immensely grateful for the distraction. A strange, sudden impulse to leap to her feet at his words ran through her body. To cry that all of the dragons weren't dead, to reveal her true identity to the people surrounding her. She squashed the impulse almost immediately, but her body gave an almost violent twitch, one that both Robb and Lady Stark must have noticed. "There sits the only king I mean to bend my knee to," the great Jon boomed, pointing his sword at Robb, who tensed beside her. "The king in the north." Malia watched with wide eyes as he knelt in front of them, placing his sword at Robb's feet. Robb slowly stood at this point, his shoulder straightening at the weight behind this moment. Malia was momentarily struck by how much he had changed since the boy that she had married almost a year ago. Lord Karstark jumped to his feet as well. "I'll have peace on those terms," he declared, drawing his own sword and kneeling. "They can keep their red castle and their iron chair. The king in the north. The king of winter." Lady Mormont cried, adding her mace to the others. Theon Greyjoy enthusiastically leapt to his feet. "Am I your brother, now and always?" he asked Robb. "Now and always," Robb agreed. Theon knelt beside the great Jon, his sword point in the ground and his head bowed. "My sword is yours in victory and defeat, from this day until my last day." Feeling as if she should say something, Malia rose to her feet as well and the crowd quieted. The momentous moment was not lost on her. 3 centuries ago, Torrhen Stark knelt to her ancestors instead of fighting a war they would not win. It had been 300 years since the title of the King of the North had been used, and now, for the first time since, they were declaring their independence once more. "You are my husband and now you are my king," she declared, her voice carrying so everyone could hear. "You have the support of Dorne behind you. Together we will make sure the Lannisters get everything that they deserve." Robb's eyes softened as they met hers and he knew he appreciated her words. More cheers followed her declaration and the great Jon called once more, "The king in the north." The other lords joined in, chanting over and over until her head rang with the words. Malia, unable to hold back a victorious, gleeful smile, looked around them and noticed there was only one person who wasn't on their feet, cheering with the rest. Lady Stark still sat on the bench, a defeated, sad look on her face as she stared at her firstborn son. Robb's fingers brushed against her own, drawing her gaze, even if he wasn't looking at her. Pride ran through her as Robb graciously accepted the massive responsibility that had just been thrust upon him, and it wasn't until 2 seconds later that she was struck with a sudden realization. Rhaenys Targaryen was never meant to be a queen, that right to rule would have fallen to her brother Aegon after her father. But somehow, against all odds, Malia Stark had just become queen in the north and she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 17, Disappointed, again. Malia gazed up at the sky from where she was leaning against a tree, her eyes on the streak of red that was still visible in the sky. It had hovered above them all day as if watching them and she found herself wondering just how many people could see it around the world. Could her family in Dorne see what she was seeing? Was her aunt and uncle currently watching the same red streak? The dream or memory of Rhaegar Targaryen surfaced in her mind's eye, his violet gaze proudly staring down at his infant son as he spoke to her. "Your brother is a very important baby, Rhaenys, and not just to us." The bleeding star that we saw on the night of his birth signaled his arrival as the prince that was promised. Sadness swept through her as she stared up at the red streak, missing the brother that she would never get to see grow up. She had heard many different theories around the camp about what this strange phenomenon could mean. Some said that it was Lannister red and was a sign of victories to come. Others said that it was the blood of those that had died in the war already. But Malia had her own interpretation. If she squinted just right, she could almost imagine it was a dragon speeding through the sky with a trail of fire behind it. Shoving away the thoughts of dragons, Malia's eyes fell to the dirty, smelly man sitting chained in the giant cage that Robb had ordered made for him. Robb and Lady Stark were currently in the main tent with the rest of the bannermen, discussing his peace terms with one of the Lannister prisoners who was going to bring them to King's Landing. It was the only reason she was currently here right now. If Robb knew where she was, she would be in serious trouble, yet again. She found herself continually drawn to the King's lair ever since he had been captured, and she didn't quite understand why. It didn't have anything to do with his appearance, because not only was he a disgusting mess at the moment, but Malia apparently preferred men with auburn hair as to golden. Maybe she was drawn to him because Robb had expressly forbid anyone to talk to him. Maybe it was because he had murdered her grandfather, or because he was the grandson of the man who had ordered the death of her and her family. She didn't quite comprehend the curiosity that she felt, but she found herself wanting to talk with him in an attempt to understand him. "I can feel your eyes boring into the back of my head," the Kingslayer drawled, his voice slightly hoarse from disuse. "Why don't you come out and face me like a man?" The corner of her lips twitched. It appeared that even though he was in the worst position possible, he still maintained his dry, sarcastic attitude. Lacing her fingers together in front of her, Malia slowly walked forward, moving around to the front of the cage. Surprise flickered in the depths of his eyes when he saw her, but before he could speak, the guard standing at the door of the cage caught sight of her and looked both alarmed and uncomfortable. "I require 5 minutes alone with the Kingslayer," Malia told him in a voice brooking no argument, her face expressionless. He looked from her to the prisoner and back again, shifting on his feet. "I was told not to let anyone near him." He trailed off at the dangerous, slightly predatory glint in her brown eyes, so similar to that of her uncle's. Her head tilted to the side. "You're going to give me 5 minutes and I won't tell my husband that you fell asleep during your shift last night." He paled, bowed his head slightly, and quickly walked away, allowing Malia to turn her attention to the man sitting chained in front of her. Well, Jaime Lannister drawled softly, a smirk on his face. "A visit from the warrior princess of Dawn. I feel lucky indeed. Though I suppose I should be calling you a warrior queen, now shouldn't I?" He corrected, his eyes flickering to the crown atop her head. Malia suppressed the urge to reach up and self-consciously touch it. One of the Riverlords had made one for her and Robb soon after he was declared king in the north. It was bronze, and more feminine than Robb's, which was fashioned after the old kings of winter with 9 iron spikes in the shape of long swords. She still hadn't quite gotten used to the idea that she was now the queen of the entire north. It wasn't something she really wanted nor expected to ever happen to her. "I would prefer it if you didn't call me anything at all," Malia quipped, moving a step further to examine him closer. "Is there anything I can get you, Kingslayer? A proper chamber pot? A bar of soap, perhaps, or maybe a comb?" His smirk widened at her blush, disinterested voice. "I'm honored that you would think of me at a time like this, Your Grace. What brings a woman like you to this humble cell of mine? Is your husband not pleasing you properly, or are you in desperate need of some actual intelligent conversation?" Malia wrinkled her nose in disgust. "I can assure you, Kingslayer, that I am more than satisfied in all aspects of my marriage. Tell me, why would I want to touch someone who fucks his own sister? Or attempts to murder a child by pushing him out of the window?" An involuntary expression of annoyance crossed his face, giving Malia pause. It was only for a fraction of a second, and the only reason she noticed it was because she was watching him so intently. Was it because she mentioned his sexual relationship with his sister? Or was it because of the name Kingslayer? The Kingslayer's lips tightened. "This rumor again. King Robb has already talked to me about this, and I'll ask the same thing to you as I did him. Have you any proof?" Malia shrugged carelessly. "Your 3 golden-haired children and your terrible family are proof enough for me. You pushed a child out of a window because he caught you fucking your twin, and your son just chopped off the head of one of the most loved and powerful men of Westeros. Oh, how the mighty Kingslayer has fallen," she sighed dramatically. Something definitely flickered across his face at the name, and her eyes narrowed slightly. "What's wrong, Lannister? Do you not like infamous name that all of Westeros knows you by?" she asked quietly, scrutinizing him and realizing that she was right. "Then perhaps you shouldn't have stabbed your king in the back. Why did you do it? Did you want the throne for yourself? Was it your father's orders?" she continued, pressing as the anger continued to build. "What could have possibly possessed you to break your vows and stab the man you were supposed to protect?" Something dark flashed through the Kingslayer's eyes, and she belatedly realized that his own irritation was building along with hers. "Since you seem to be able to pass judgment on an event that you weren't even there for, what would you have done if your king was about to burn thousands of men, women and children? Tell me, would you have kept your vows while they all died screaming around you?" He snapped, glaring up at her and breathing heavily. A moment later he abruptly shut his mouth and looked away, clenching his jaw again and again, apparently regretting his outburst. Malia blinked, halting her tirade as uncertainty swept through her. This was a piece of information that she had never heard before. She knew Lord Tyrion had called her grandfather the Mad King, but to threaten to burn the entire city to the ground. What? She asked quietly, taken aback. Half a second later her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? She demanded heatedly. Explain yourself. The Kingslayer's expression evened out, and his carefree smile was back. Explain what, Your Grace? He asked, looking deceptively puzzled. I think the lack of food and water may be messing with my head. I can assure you that I have no idea what I am saying. Or what you were saying. Who are you again? Malia knew that he was just trying to provoke a reaction from her, but that didn't stop her from glaring into his smug green eyes, full of frustration. As she did so, a portion of a long-forgotten memory resurfaced, one that must have been from when she was only 2 or 3 years old. She remembered standing in front of the steps leading up to the Iron Throne, clutching her father's hand anxiously as she stared up at her grandfather and grandmother. Rhaenys liked her. She smiled at her and gave nice hugs. Her grandfather never smiled. She remembered him wrinkling his nose at the sight of her, his mean violet eyes narrowing as he stared down at her. Did you have to bring the Dornish girl? He complained loudly, causing her to shrink further behind her father's legs. I was under the impression that you were presenting my grandson, who I hear is a true Targaryen. She remembered looking away from her grandfather, scared of the look on his face, and landing on a man standing near the king, dressed all in white, with soft-looking yellow hair. Sympathetic green eyes met hers and she had to fight hard to blink away the sudden tears. Malia blinked 3 times as she stared down at a man who looked drastically different than the shining Kingsguard knight he used to be. She knew that he had been part of King Aerys Kingsguard, but it was one thing to know this information and another to remember a small connection that they had when she was Rhaenys. You, she whispered, shocked and completely thrown off balance. He gave her a strange look, and opened his mouth to comment, but something caught his eye over her shoulder and his expression turned amused instead. Looks like someone might be in trouble, he sang in a soft voice, barely restraining his smirk. My lady. Malia glanced over her shoulder to see Robb approaching. His face was mostly expressionless as he looked at the Kingslayer, but when his blue eyes met hers, she could see the icy fury in them. I would like to speak with you, if you have a moment. Of course, Malia agreed, putting an arm through his offered elbow. She didn't spare the Kingslayer another glance as Robb led her away, knowing that would just further increase his anger. Her heart was pounding as she berated herself for getting caught. She knew how overprotective Robb was and she knew that he would be cross with her, but she had been counting on having more time while he was in his meeting. Robb hadn't spoken a single word the entire walk back to their tent and Malia was inwardly bracing herself for a lecture. She had enough time to enter the tent and notice Lady Stark sitting by the table with the war map on it before Robb rounded on her, blue eyes flashing. What in the 7 hells were you doing talking to the Kingslayer? He demanded, obviously struggling to rein in his temper. The man is our prisoner, Malia, you shouldn't be sneaking over to start a conversation with him. I'm sorry, she murmured softly, moving to sit in one of the chairs next to Lady Stark. She looked up at her husband, his expression flickering in the candlelight as she thought about how best to explain. I was just curious, I suppose. Growing up with my uncle and my father, I've heard such terrible things about the Lannisters, and they've instilled a sense of automatic hatred of them, for good reason. Lord Tywin ordered the deaths of my Aunt Elia and her children and put all the blame on the dogs that he sent to do the dirty work. I just wanted a glimpse behind the madness. Robb sighed at her explanation, the anger leaving his shoulders. He walked over and knelt beside her, taking her hands that were resting on her lap. I'm sorry about your aunt, Malia, and believe me when I say that I hate the Lannisters just as much as you do. They killed part of your family and my father, pushed my brother out of a window and have my sisters as hostages. But Jaime Lannister is dangerous and I don't want you speaking to him alone. Promise me, Malia. Knowing that she could hardly refuse, Malia nodded. I promise. They all turned to look at the tent entrance as Grey Wind sauntered in, strolling over and collapsing down next to Malia with a world-weary sigh. She reached down to scratch behind his ears while glancing from Robb to Lady Stark. How was the meeting? It could have gone better, Robb sighed, crossing his arms and leaning against the table. Lord Karstark was openly against the peace terms, as I'm sure others were as well. And part of me can hardly blame them. How can we talk about peace when the Lannisters are still ravaging the Riverlands and slaughtering its people? Perhaps because it will save thousands of lives and bring your sisters back to us, Lady Stark commented dryly. Malia glanced over at her and felt a smidge of sympathy run through her. All the poor woman wanted was her family back together again. She had worked incredibly hard to convince Robb just to agree to offer these peace terms. I have told you multiple times, Mother, I cannot trade Jaime Lannister for the girls. My bannerman will string me up by my feet. He snapped in frustration, before making a valiant effort to lower his voice. I will do everything I can for the girls, you know I will. But it's more complicated now. I have to think of all of my men from both the North and the Riverlands. So what will be our next move? Malia interjected quickly, trying to diffuse an argument that she had already heard many times. Lady Stark looked as if she was ready to press her case once more. I think we're all aware that the Lannisters are unlikely to agree to those terms. We've been successful in driving some of the Lannister armies away from the rest of the Riverlords' lands. Many of my men are urging me to march on Tywin Lannister at Harrenhal, but the fortress is too strong to attack directly. Besides, that would be exactly what Lord Tywin would want. He paused, and Malia noticed not for the first time just how tired her husband looked. She was proud of him though. His men loved him and respected him because not only was he their king, but he was also a warrior who fought on the front line alongside them. We're going to move further west. Sir Stafford Lannister is building an army at Oxcross to replace the one that they've lost. Malia nodded slowly, thinking out loud. So if we attack the Lannisters' home and get close enough to Casterly Rock, then we can draw out Lord Tywin and his army. Right? Robb nodded, his brows furrowed as he began to pace back and forth in front of them, thinking out loud. With the addition of the Riverlands in our army, it makes retreating to the north nigh on impossible at the moment. With that in mind, our last step in this war will be an attack on King's Landing and the Lannisters. I've thought of 2 additional plans to help us succeed in capturing the city. First, Theon will be returning to Pike to secure the use of Lord Greyjoy's ships and his men. We will attack by land and they will attack by sea. Robb, you can't be serious. Lord Greyjoy is not trustworthy, you don't want him as an ally. Lady Stark interrupted heatedly, looking shocked that Robb would even consider such a plan. Your father had to go to war to end his rebellion. They say he has 200 ships, Robb countered, refusing to back down as he shot her a quick look. It will be an uneasy alliance, to be sure, but our main goal is to capture King's Landing and overthrow the Lannisters. If Lord Greyjoy assists in this task, then he will be named King of the Iron Islands. Lady Stark was still shaking her head. Don't send Theon, she advised. Send Jason Mallister or Tytos Blackwood, just keep Theon close to you. Who better to treat with Balon Greyjoy than his last surviving son? Robb asked, trying to hide his frustration with the fact that his mother was questioning his decisions. Theon has fought bravely for us, Mother, I trust him. I don't, Lady Stark said bluntly, her blue tully eyes serious as she tried to reach through to Robb. I would sooner keep him as a hostage just to be safe. Malia half listened to the argument, a very vivid picture of her and Robb leading their army in an attack on King's Landing, their men breaking through their doors as they stormed the city to kill the Lannisters. On the other side of the city, Theon was leading 200 ships in an attack on the other side, completely overwhelming the enemy. She wanted so badly for that picture to become reality that she just might do anything to make it happen. Theon has been a Stark for the last 9 years, Malia spoke up, joining in the argument on Robb's side. Both you and Lord Stark have helped raised him to be an honorable man, and he grew up to be like a brother to Robb. If Robb trusts him to acquire ships for our cause, then I trust him as well. She caught Robb's grateful eye and gave him a small smile. That brings me to my next plan, Robb continued once his mother had fallen silent, outnumbered. If the Lannisters don't accept our peace terms, then we're going to need to side with a suitable person to sit on the Iron Throne, one who will recognize the North as an independent kingdom. Mother, I need you to ride south to the Stormlands to negotiate with Renly Baratheon. Lady Stark's eyes widened. Me? She asked in disbelief. Why on earth? You know him and you know his family, Rob explained patiently, ceasing his pacing. I trust no one more than I trust you. There was a moment of silence in the tent, and Malia could see that despite herself, Lady Stark's expression softened. Renly Baratheon has an army of 100,000 men. If we form an alliance with him, we'll outnumber the Lannisters 2-1. When they feel the jaws beginning to shut, we'll sue for peace, get the girls back and go home, for good. Malia could practically feel the hope radiating from Lady Stark as she listened to her son's words. She stood, eyes shining. You've done so well, she murmured with a small smile, and all of the sudden, Malia felt as if she were intruding on a private moment. Your father would be proud. Rob swallowed harshly, walking over to his mother and pressing a grateful kiss to her forehead before pulling her into a hug. We'll all be together again soon, Malia heard him promise softly. Taking a deep breath and putting a smile on her face, Lady Stark cleared her throat as she pulled back. I'm going to prepare my things. I'll ride out at first light. Rob waited until she left before collapsing down on the chair she had abandoned with a weary sigh. Feeling sympathetic, Malia walked up behind him, unclasping his cloak and pulling it away before beginning to knead his shoulders. He let out a low groan, his head dropping back slightly as she worked the tension out of his muscles. Who knew being a king would be so stressful and so difficult, Malia murmured teasingly, smiling as he gave a low chuckle. Well, I know one thing for sure. I couldn't possibly be a king without my queen by my side, he responded, reaching up for her right hand and pressing a kiss to the middle of her palm. She shivered slightly, constantly surprised how such a simple action could cause so much heat to run through her body. I feel like I can only truly be myself when I'm with you. To everyone else I'm the king in the north. Even with my mother it's a difficult line between being her king and being her son. He tugged her over to him, guiding her so she sat across his lap, her arms looped around her neck and his around her waist. Thank you, he told her sincerely, blue eyes flickering between each of her own. Thank you for being so understanding about how this changes us. Malia shrugged his thanks away. Your mother was right, Rob, you've done really well and we're both really proud of you. You're doing what you think is best for your army and I think you've done the right thing by sending her to negotiate with Renly Baratheon. I'm glad you think so. I know you're not going to be pleased with me but I've decided that you're going to accompany her, he declared in a soft voice, his face set as he inwardly steeled himself for her reaction. Malia froze, certain that she had heard him incorrectly. Her eyebrows furrowed as she gave a short laugh, shaking her head. I'm sorry, I could have sworn I just heard you say. You did. Malia could have screamed. Instead, she attempted to swallow her rage and speak in a rational voice even though her entire body was stiff and her voice sounded slightly strangled. I have done everything you've asked of me, almost everything you've asked of me, she amended, thinking of the earlier incident with the Kingslayer. Ever since the battle in the Whispering Wood, I haven't asked to join you in any of the recent battles. I've stayed in the tent like an obedient wife, telling myself that this was the compromise, that this was something I could do to make your life a little easier. But it's not a compromise, Rob, I gave in because I love you. And now, after all this, you're still going to send me away. Why? To continue to keep me away from the fighting. Yes, Rob answered, simply and honestly. She had to give him some credit, he never dropped his gaze even in the face of her terrible anger. Fine, Malia snapped, pushing his hands away and standing. One of these days, you're going to realize that your constant need to protect me and keep me safe is not helping our relationship. All it's doing is creating a resentment towards you. She shook her head slowly, some of the anger draining out of her and a quiet disappointment taking its place. When are you going to start viewing me as your equal instead of as your wife? She glanced away, missing the flash of hurt in his eyes as she moved towards the bed, turning her back to him as she stripped out of her dress and pulled her nightdress on. She heard Rob approaching her from behind, but didn't turn around to face him. He hesitantly slipped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer when she didn't push him away. I'm not going to apologize for wanting to protect you and keep you safe, he began softly, thumbs tracing a pattern soothingly when he felt her stiffen. You're my wife. Malia stepped forward, pulling away from him before turning around. I'm tired of having this same old argument, Rob, she sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. You say that I'm your wife and I say that I've grown up fighting and it's a part of who I am. No matter how many times you say otherwise, I'm not your partner. Not in this marriage and not as your queen. Malia he tried, but she cut him off. I'll go with your lady mother because you're my king and I don't want a cage next to the kingslayers. But I want you to know that I'm doing this against my will. She looked up at him, lost. When I get back, I would like to fight alongside you, instead of against you. If I cannot, maybe I should just return to Winterfell. That's probably what you want, isn't it? Me safely locked away in the north. Yes, no. He gave a frustrated growl, throwing up his hands. I don't know. I can't get past the thought that war is no place for a woman and I know you're not an ordinary woman. He added quickly when she opened her mouth to argue. What if you fight beside me and I can't look out for you? What if you're fighting someone better than you or you become outnumbered? What if you die? What if I trip on a root and smash my head into a rock? Malia countered immediately, crossing her arms. What if I choke on a piece of fruit or get trampled by a horse? I don't know if you're right or if I'm right, but frankly I don't care. Our lives can end at any moment and I would rather die beside you, fighting. There was a long moment of silence where they stood there, staring at each other as they digested everything the other had been saying. Robb was the first to break the silence. You leave at first light, he murmured, watching her uncertainly. Can we put aside our differences for the moment so we avoid going to bed angry? That was one of the few pieces of marriage advice that my father gave me while I was growing up. What other advice did he give you? Malia asked, tilting her head to the side, looking genuinely curious. Robb felt a strange mixture of sadness and regret as he thought back to those moments with his father. If he had known how little time he had left, there would have been so much more he would have wanted to say or ask. His first piece of advice was to share everything with each other, because a marriage cannot survive without communication. And then when you have children and your life feels as if it is consumed by them, always make time to spend together, just the two of you. His last piece of advice, and he always said this was the most important one, was to make love to your wife whenever possible, as often as possible. Malia's heart had given a painful lurch as she was reminded yet again of all the truths that she was keeping from her husband. If what Ned Stark said was true, was her marriage doomed to fail? When she heard his last piece of advice, however, she rolled her eyes, unable to stop the amused smile from crossing her face. Your father did not say that to you. Maybe not, he agreed, looking encouraged by the sight of her smile. But I believe it's sound advice. In fact, if anyone asks for my opinion, that's the first thing I'll tell them. You are such a typical man, Malia snorted, shaking her head. Thinking with your cock instead of your head. I have to disagree with you on that, he grinned, blue eyes twinkling as he took a step toward her, grabbing her hands and pulling her closer to him. Both my cock and my head happen to agree wholeheartedly on this point. She couldn't help but laugh, wondering how he had pulled her out of her bad mood so quickly. She didn't forget her anger towards him by any means, but yelling and arguing had proved useless in the past. She looked up at him as he ran the back of his fingers down her cheek. You're lucky I love you, she teased. His eyes shone with warmth and affection. I'm the luckiest man in the world, he whispered, before bending down and pressing his lips against hers. The next morning, Malia found herself standing with her hands on her hips, staring down at her bag on the bed. She had shoved the egg and moon tea ingredients into the bag with her 2 spare dresses and underclothes. It was risky to take them with her, but she felt it was an even bigger risk to leave it here where Robb or someone else could find them. Your Grace. A voice sounded just outside the tent, causing Malia to frown for different reasons. Even with all the time that has passed since his men had crowned Robb king in the north, Malia was still unused to being called Your Grace or being referred to as a queen. For another, the voice that had spoken was distinctly female, and as far as Malia knew, the only other woman she had met was Lady Stark. You may come in, Malia called, hiding her surprise when a pretty young woman entered, carrying a small bag. Her eyes flickered over to Malia for a moment before training on the floor as she curtsied. And you are? My name is Talisa, Your Grace, the woman told her with a polite smile. King Robb sent for a healer to check your wound before your journey. His overprotectiveness knows no bounds, Malia muttered with a sigh. Well, all right, let's get this over with. The Seven knows he'll check later to make sure it was done. If you'll give me a moment, I'll call you back in when I'm situated. Talisa bowed her head and stepped back outside while Malia shrugged out of one sleeve of her riding dress, making sure she was appropriately covered as she sat at the table and called her back in. Talisa took the chair next to her and began to unwrap the bandages around her left bicep. She gently turned Malia's arm to see the entire wound. This has healed nicely. No swelling or signs of pus around the stitches, Talisa informed her, glancing up to meet her gaze. Have you had any abnormal pain or signs of fever? Malia shook her head. Good. Then I'm going to go ahead and remove these stitches. Talisa reached into her bag and began to clean the stitches and her supplies before she began to remove them. She was silent for a while as she worked. The men in this camp gossip more than any woman I've ever met. Is it true that you got this wound because you disguised yourself as a man so you could fight in your husband's army? Malia slowly quirked an eyebrow at her. Well, that was very bold of you, she proclaimed in a dry voice. Talisa lowered her gaze to her work again, though Malia noticed she didn't flush or look embarrassed. My apologies, Your Grace, that was... Yes, it's true, Malia interrupted, surveying her with interest now. Where are you from, Lady Talisa? I can't quite place your accent. Volantis, Talisa answered, pausing to look over at Malia quizzically. I thought women weren't allowed to fight in Westeros. I'm still learning the customs here, but it is uncommon, is it not? I was raised in Dorne, the customs there are different. It's not common anywhere north of Dorne, hence why I had to disguise myself, she responded distractedly. Do highborn ladies from Volantis typically leave home, become healers and follow the army from battle to battle? Highborn. Talisa repeated, frowning. I'm afraid I'm not. It's all right, Lady Talisa, you don't have to pretend around me, Malia assured her with a smile, patting her hand. But I've been through enough years of rigorous training in how to be a proper lady to recognize the signs. Your posture is impeccable, you speak more clearly and efficiently than 3/4 of the people here, and you are more bold and outspoken than you have any right to be when speaking to a queen. And here I was thinking that I was a good liar, Lady Talisa grimaced, looking down again as she finished removing the last of the stitches. I'm sorry if I've overstepped my bounds and offended you, I truly meant no harm. It's oddly refreshing, Malia told her honestly, waving her apologies away. Malia got the hint that the other woman didn't want to talk about herself any further when she changed the subject. Well, my job here is done. Is there anything else I can do for you, Your Grace? Malia shook her head as Lady Talisa packed her bags and stood. I appreciate your assistance, my lady. Be careful out there. An army isn't the safest place for a woman all alone. Lady Talisa inclined her head in acknowledgement before leaving the tent. Malia absent-mindedly fixed her dress, wondering if she should have Benna or Cole in attempt to keep an eye on Lady Talisa just in case. Not all men were as honorable as the Stark men, she knew. She also knew that many men were missing their wives or the comforts of women. Most men were idiots to begin with, but lonely, horny men could turn into dangerous idiots for the few women that were in this camp. Malia grabbed the bag from her bed along with her sword and left the tent, heading to where the horses were kept. One of Rob's men came up to her immediately to take her bag and tie it to Shadow's saddle. Malia looked around and locked eyes with Lady Stark, who gave her a sympathetic smile from where she was seated atop her own horse. Rob turned to see who had caught his mother's attention, and his face softened when he saw her. Theon, standing a few feet away from them with his own bags, surreptitiously winked at her. Malia's gaze turned defiant when Rob's blue eyes dropped to the sheathed sword in her hand and he frowned. You may try to keep me from the fighting, Rob, but I'm not going to walk into a potential enemy's camp without any protection. Rob held his hands up defensively. I wasn't going to say anything. Liar, Malia chided half-heartedly, not wanting to start yet another argument. He walked closer to her, putting his hands on her waist. All I was going to do, my dear wife, is wish you a safe journey. Help my mother out as best you can and give my regards to Lord King Renly, he amended reluctantly. Malia wanted to point out that if he wasn't sending her away then they wouldn't have to say goodbye at all. She didn't want her resentment and bitterness to ruin their farewell, though. Because if she was being honest with herself, there was a strong undercurrent of fear beneath all her other emotions. She was about to leave for she didn't know how long, and she was afraid that something might happen to Rob while she was gone. "Promise me you'll be careful," Malia whispered heatedly, dropping her voice so the others wouldn't hear her. "Don't do anything rash or stupid." Rob couldn't help but smile. "I promise," he told her, before bending down and pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was far too brief for her liking, but both of them were conscious of their audience and the unresolved issues between them. "I love you," he murmured in her ear. "Even if you are still furious with me." "I wouldn't be furious with you if you actually believed that we were equals in every way," Malia reminded him without thinking. She sighed in the next moment, shaking her head. "I love you too, you big stubborn idiot." He reluctantly let her go as she pulled back and stepped around him, walking up to Theon. "Safe travels, Theon. I look forward to seeing the infamous Iron Fleet that you've boasted about so much. Especially when they are sailing to help us destroy the Lannisters." He had his self-assured smirk on his face. "It will be a sight that you can tell your children and grandchildren about." Something cold and wet touched her hand, making her jumping slightly. She looked down to see that Grey Wind had padded over to her side, gazing up at her with what she imagined to be sad eyes. "Keep looking after him, Grey," she whispered, scratching behind his ears after crouching down to his level. "Never leave his side." There was a level of understanding in his yellow eyes that showed an intelligence unlike any normal animal, and it comforted Malia more than anything else would have. Grey Wind was the deadliest weapon to keep by her husband's side, more so than any of his other guards combined. Malia stood once more, moving to Shadow's side so she could tie her sword onto the saddle so it would be in easy reach if need be. Grabbing the reins from the man who had helped her with her bags, Malia swung herself up onto the saddle and nodded at Lady Stark, who wheeled her horse around and followed their guards out of the camp. Malia, after sharing one last lingering look with Rob, turned Shadow around and pressed her heels into his side. Rob watched his mother and wife ride off into the sunrise with a troubled expression. Malia was acting polite and cordial with him, but he could see the frustration and resentment brewing behind her brown eyes. He had expected her to rage and shout at him like she usually did when she thought he was being an overprotective ass. What happened instead, however, was somehow worse. She was disappointed in him, and he knew exactly why. "Is something wrong, Your Grace?" Theon asked from beside him. He had been watching Rob's expression change instead of watching the women leave. Rob sighed, wiping his hand across his face wearily. "My wife is unhappy with me," once again Rob told him, glancing at him. "And you don't have to call me Your Grace when we're alone. It's not so bad once you get used to it," Theon shrugged. "What have you done this time?" "It's the same old argument that we've been having for months. She wants to ride beside me into every battle and I just want to keep her safe and away from the fighting. I just want her to live and yet she's so intent on throwing herself into danger," Rob vented with frustration. "Why couldn't I have a normal, obedient wife who likes planning dances and making dresses?" Theon grinned at him. "Because you would be so bored that you would probably rather pluck out your own eyeballs. Think of it this way. You would rather be married to someone who challenges you like Malia rather than someone like, say, Sansa." Rob made a disgusted face and Theon laughed. "I said someone like Sansa. She likes making dresses and dances and she dreams of her handsome knight that would marry her. You love your sister but you would hate that in your wife." "Yeah," Rob admitted grudgingly, sighing again. "Yeah, I probably would. Personally I don't know why you're so against this," Theon continued. "Malia is a damn good fighter, Rob. She helped save our asses against the wildlings when we were coming back from the Umber wedding. You've seen her train and you saw how she held her own against the Kingslayer. I mean, truthfully, she was barely holding her own and I don't know if she would have lasted much longer, but he is one of the best fighters in Westeros and not many men could have lasted as long as she did." "What's your point?" Rob ground out, annoyed that Theon wasn't taking his side. Theon, ever so blunt, turned to face him head-on. "My point, Your Grace, is that your fear of losing her is pushing her away anyway." "So what am I supposed to do?" Rob inquired. "Women in the North don't." "Is that what this is about?" Theon interrupted incredulously. "This is all because of what the men are saying. How can I control an army when I can't even control my wife?" Rob questioned in a soft voice. She disobeyed a direct order and my men all know it. So then let her fight, Theon answered, shrugging at the alarmed look on Rob's face. It will be your decision this time around. You can place her in the back of the army if you wish and surround her with guards if you have to. You can keep her as safe as possible during a battle and she gets her wish to fight. Rob considered what he was saying and knew it wasn't a terrible idea. It could work. Thanks, Theon. He clapped a hand on his friend's shoulder gratefully. I have to admit, I just might miss having you around. Of course you will, Theon smirked. I'm being serious, you ass, Rob chuckled, rolling his eyes. You've been like an older brother to me for years now, Theon, and I don't trust anyone more than you to convince your father to help us in our fight against the Lannisters. Theon's smirk faded as he nodded, his face determined and serious. I won't let you down, Rob. I have my horse saddled and ready to go and I'll ride you when I have succeeded and we're leading the Iron Fleet to destroy the Lannisters. Chapter 18, Seeds of Doubt. Today is my 1-year wedding anniversary, was Malia's first thought when she rolled over after yet another night of fitful sleep. As soon as the thought registered in her mind, a somber, solemn blanket enveloped her, one that she could not seem to shake. She should not be here, so many leagues away from her husband, about to negotiate with a potential enemy during the middle of a war. They should be home at Winterfell with not a care in the world. She could almost picture that simple, carefree life. They would be tangled in the bedsheets, having a picnic in the glass gardens or enjoying the peace of the godswood. Jon, Sansa, Arya, Bran and Rickon would all be there, of course, growing up under the loving, watchful eyes of Lord and Lady Stark. No family was perfect, of course, but this vision in her head was as near perfect as she was like to get. Except that if things were as they should be, she would have been a Targaryen princess and it was entirely possible that she would never have even met Rob. Nothing was more confusing than the realization that she could not have had it both ways, that she now didn't know if she would pick her true family or her new one. A year, she thought again, a picture of her husband's handsome face appearing in her mind's eye. Despite everything that her and Rob had been through and against all odds, they had made it a year. When she thought about the person that she had been a year ago, she couldn't even recognize herself. Her hatred for the Lannisters and the Starks had burned bright along with the resentment towards her father, her new husband and her strong desire to return home. And now she loved that husband and his family more than she would have thought possible. Even though her hatred for the Lannisters was stronger than ever, she was fighting alongside the Starks and his men. So much can change in a year, she thought as she wearily climbed out of bed. If we survive this war, where will we be next year? She missed Rob, she was mad at Rob, she loved Rob and resented Rob. She had hoped that some distance between them would help things, but truthfully it only served to confuse her all the more. Malia chose a dark grey, long-sleeved dress for this morning, pairing it with her bronze crown. They were drawing close to Bitterbridge, where it was rumored that King Renly and his army were camped. She wanted them to respect her as both a Stark and the Queen in the north. She knew she would have to leave her sword with Shadow, but she had both of Nymaria's gifts, one strapped to her thigh and the other hidden in her boot. Malia exited her tent and made her way over to the small campfire. Sir Wendell Marndaly, a man both tall and large with a giant mustache, was sitting and stringing his bow while another man who she believed was called Shad was stirring something in a pot. Both men stood as she approached and bowed. I've made some porridge, if it please you, your grace, Shad murmured, holding out a bowl. You are most kind, Malia answered, accepting the bowl with a smile before heading over to where Lady Stark was seated with her own bowl of porridge. Good morning, my lady, she greeted, sitting next to her good mother. How did you sleep? Well enough, Lady Stark answered, though Malia suspected that wasn't entirely true. Lady Stark looked more weary than Malia had ever seen her. Although she held herself as a lady should, her face was pale and she was more withdrawn than usual, understandably so. She had just lost her husband and her family was split across Westeros. Sir Wendell has informed me that we should reach the Upper Mandaya today. King Renly won't be too far beyond that. Malia nodded in response before focusing on breaking her fast, conscious of the ears always listening to their conversation. Rob had sent 20 of his best men to accompany them, all good, loyal men, but they were always close by. A silence fell over the both of them, leaving Malia to wonder if it was only awkward for her. The Lady of Winterfell seemed preoccupied by her thoughts, and Malia was at a loss for words. Truthfully, she had never really felt comfortable around her good mother, not like she had been with Lord Stark. Maybe it was because of the silent judgment Malia had felt from her when they had first met, or maybe it was because of their disagreement over Jon. Either way, Malia was never entirely at ease. She waited until Sir Wendell and Shad joined the others in deconstructing their camp before speaking again. "What is Renly Baratheon like?" she asked in a curious voice, wanting to know what they were walking into. "As I told Robb, it has been many years since I've seen him." Lady Stark stared down at her now empty bowl as if she was confused how it came to be that way. "But as a boy, he was always laughing and running through the halls. Even at that age he was more charismatic than either of his brothers." "Do you think that he will agree to Robb's terms?" Malia pressed, her porridge forgotten. "Robb is using him for his army and will ally with him if he acknowledges the North as an independent state. Even so, Stannis is the rightful king and Robb knows it." Lady Stark sighed. "I cannot say what Renly will or won't do, but we must do our best to negotiate an alliance with him." "Come," she said, putting her bowl aside and standing. "It is time we were away." Their belongings were packed and their horses resaddled within the hour, and it only took half a day before their scouts rode back informing them that a group of men were approaching. The men were mounted and clad in their mail. The knight closest to them, the one with a blue jay on his surcoat, nudged his horse forward. "Greetings, my lady." His eyes flickered to Malia's crown and he frowned before grudgingly adding, "Your Grace. I am Sir Colan of Green Pools. These are dangerous lands that you cross." Unfortunately, he spoke the truth. Though they had attempted to stay far away from towns, they still came across bands of armed men. Malia had tensed each time, her hand drifting toward her sword, but the men never attacked them. "We have important business to discuss," Lady Stark answered, her shoulders straightened and her voice clear and strong. "We come as an envoy to Robb Stark, the king in the north, to treat with Renly Baratheon, the king in the south." Sir Colan didn't even bat an eye. "King Renly is the crowned king of all the 7 kingdoms," he pointed out, much to Malia's displeasure. It didn't seem to be a good sign for this so-called alliance. It was apparent that the man had only called her Your Grace as a sign of resigned respect, not because he believed her to be a queen. "But I would be honored to escort you both to meet with the king." Before Malia or Lady Stark could answer, Sir Colan gestured to his men and formed 2 flanks on either side of their group. Lady Stark shot Malia a quick look as she opened her mouth to speak, and subtly shook her head. So Malia swallowed her words for the time being and stayed silent as they began their march towards Renly Baratheon's camp. It took them nearly another hour to reach it, but once it came into view, the sheer enormity of it was overwhelming. The sounds reached her first, the normal sounds of an army's camp, just magnified tenfold. She heard men shouting, steel crashing, horses neighing. Her eyes flickered around to see siege engines lined up, buckets and rolling rams on wheels. Thousands of men milled about between thousands of tents and thousands of campfires. Banners fluttered high in the wind. The golden rows of high garden, a fox and flowers, a striding huntsman, oak leaves, cranes, a cloud of black and orange butterflies, nightingales, sea turtles, and dozens more. She wasn't quite sure how many men had answered Stannis Baratheon's call, but it seemed that most of the south had flocked to Renly. Sir Wendell rode up next to them, a frown visible on his large face. "Do you hear that?" he asked in a hushed voice. Malia tilted her head to the side, listening until she heard a dull roar above the sounds of the rest of the camp. "Is that?" She trailed off, certain that something was wrong with her ears, because there was no way that she was hearing this correctly. Cheering Lady Stark confirmed in a grim voice. Sure enough, when they reached the top of the hill, they could see what appeared to be a melee in progress below the small castle. Hundreds of men were gathered in a circle, shouting, cursing and drinking ale. 2 armored soldiers were fighting in the middle of the circle, of which the ground was torn and littered with bits of armor and lances. Sir Colan mentioned something about going to introduce them to the king and pushed his way through the crowd. Malia's wide, disbelieving eyes drifted to the opposite end of the circle where 2 figures were seated upon a raised, makeshift throne. It was a shock to Malia's system when she laid her eyes upon Renly Baratheon. He was a younger version of his brother Robert, a vision of what he must have looked like before he grew fat. Strong and fit with an easy smile, Renly Baratheon cut a handsome, confident figure with that golden crown of antlers and roses upon his head. Next to him must be Margaery Tyrell, his new wife. She was a beautiful, delicate-looking young woman, with large, brown doe eyes and soft brown hair. "Loras!" she shouted, cheering the young Knight of Flowers on. "Highgarden." Marliar leaned closer to Lady Stark, speaking loud enough in her good mother's ear so that she would be heard. "Please tell me that this is some sort of deranged dream," Marliar shouted, her brown eyes dark and stormy. "Please tell me that an army of 100,000 men isn't really camped here, drinking and participating in tournaments and mock fights. Would that I could." Marliar couldn't hear the words muttered under Lady Stark's breath, but she could read her lips and interpret the grim expression on her face well enough. Most of her attention was focused on the two men fighting in the center, both clad head to toe in armor. One apparently was Loras Tyrell, whose skill with a blade was well known throughout Westeros. She wasn't sure who the other fighter was, but at the moment she found she didn't care. Her eyes were on the fight, but her mind was trying to grapple with her sudden rage and frustration. These men were laughing, drinking and shouting while the men in her husband's army were fighting for their lives, surrounded by death, losing limbs and losing their lives. What game did this pretend king think he was playing? Why was he allowed to wait off to the side while the Stark army did all the work and killed all the Lannister soldiers? Muttering spread through the crowd and Marliar refocused, realizing that the shouting had diminished and the fight had ended. The winner, Marliar realized with shock, was what looked to be a woman, the tallest woman that Marliar had ever seen. Her shoulders were broad, and short, straw-colored hair clung to her head once she knelt and her helm was removed. Marliar tilted her head to the side as she examined the woman who she gathered was Brienne of Tarth, or as the men in the crowd mockingly called her, Brienne the Beauty. She watched, detached, as King Renly admitted her into his Rainbow Guard at her request, though she felt slightly indignant at the obvious disdain everyone seemed to have for her. She wasn't a good-looking woman by any means, her nose looked like it had been broken more than once, her mouth was wide and flat and when she beamed at her king, she saw that her teeth were crooked. Yet she was a woman and a good fighter, so Marliar couldn't help but understand what she has had to deal with. Sir Colan swung down off his horse once Brienne of Tarth was adorned with a rainbow cloak. "Your Grace," he called, bending down to one knee. "I have the honor to bring you Lady Catelyn Stark, an envoy sent by her son Robb, Lord of Winterfell and his wife." "Lord of Winterfell, and King in the North," Lady Stark interrupted pointedly, dismounting off her horse and moving to stand beside Sir Colan. "I have the pleasure to introduce you to my good daughter, Marliar of House Martell and Queen in the North." Lady Stark looked back at her and Marliar took this as her cue. She handed Shadow's reins to Sir Wendell and slid from her saddle, picking up her skirts to avoid the mud as she made her way across the circle. "Well met, Queen Marliar," King Renly greeted, watching her carefully through impassive eyes, which she noticed were a deeper blue than Robb's. "Lady Catelyn, I am pleased to see you again," he welcomed, his voice lighter as his eyes focused on her. "May I introduce my wife, Margaery of House Tyrell?" "You are both very welcome here," Margaery smiled, her voice soft and somehow angelic sounding. "I am so very sorry for your loss." Marliar hid a grimace at the words, noting the sudden tension in Lady Stark's shoulders. While the words were conveyed with a sadness and warmth, Margaery Tyrell had likely never met Lord Stark and therefore, her words were empty. "You are most kind," Lady Stark answered automatically. King Renly raised his voice for all to hear. "My lady, I swear to you I will see the Lannisters answer for your husband's murder. When I take King's Landing, I'll being you Joffrey's head. It will be enough to know that justice was done," Lady Stark responded, inclining her head. "Has your son marched against Tywin Lannister yet?" a heated voice demanded. Marliar's eyes flashed at both the tone and the question as her head snapped around to see the Knight of Flowers standing behind them, an arrogant expression on his face. "Why do you ask?" Marliar questioned, her voice as sharp as one of Oberyn's whips. "Are you waiting to see the outcome of the battle before you decide to actually join the war?" A furious expression crossed his face, but Lady Stark spoke before he could, throwing her a warning glance. "I apologize for my good daughter, it has been a long and tiresome journey." The pretty Knight of Flowers, however, wasn't ready to let his anger go. "If Robb Stark," he continued, spitting his name disrespectfully, "wants to make a pact with us, he shouldn't have sent his wife and his mother, he should have come himself. Malya's barely controlled temper flared to life once more, and she found herself struggling to resist the urge to break his nose on his too perfect face. Before she could even entertain the idea any further, it was Lady Stark who spoke, her face calm but her voice strained with anger and exasperation. My son is fighting a war, not playing at one. Malya's gaze flickered to King Renly at the slight, but he smiled at her after a moment. Don't worry, my lady, he assured her, standing and offering a hand to his young wife as they descended the steps and stopped in front of them. Our war is just beginning. He looked between the two of them. Come, I will lead you both to your tents. The soldiers around them bowed as their small group walked off. Lady Brienne fell into step behind King Renly and Lady Stark, leaving Malya and Queen Margaery to bring up the rear. Malya started in surprise, looking over at the other queen when she slipped her arm through hers, her innocent, doe-like eyes shining with happiness. I cannot tell you how nice it is going to be to have another woman stay with us, she chatted, a bright smile on her face. I have my brother here, of course, and Renly, but camping with an army can get quite lonely, can't it? Malya made some vague noise of acknowledgement, but it didn't seem to deter the younger girl. Do you know what they call your husband? The young wolf. They say that he has the ability to turn into a wolf, that he eats the flesh of those that he kills. Malya couldn't hold back her tinkering laugh. And who is this they of which you speak? She questioned, her voice light. Do they also believe in snooks, grumpkins and unicorns? I can assure you, your grace, that my husband does not turn into a wolf and howl at the moon. Queen Margaery shook her head, waving her other hand dismissively. Please, call me Margaery, I insist. We are both queens, and the use of our proper titles seems both silly and confusing. Malya nodded in response and blinked at the beaming smile Margaery sent her. The girl seemed friendly, open and innocent, and Malya felt her senses sharpen and her distrust grow. They stopped in front of two identical tents and Margaery let go of her arm. You must promise me that you'll stop by my tent sometime soon and have a cup of tea with me. I should like nothing more, Malya lied, plastering a smile on her face, still trying to puzzle out if this girl was as innocent as she appeared or if the entire act was fake. Lady Stark thanked their hosts for their generosity, waiting until they were out of sight before putting a hand on Malya's back and gently pushing her into one of the tents. Frowning, Malya pulled away from her, glancing at her over her shoulder in confusion. My lady, what? Are you trying to get us imprisoned or killed? Lady Stark hissed, blue eyes flashing. Malya gaped at her, hurt and confusion spreading through her. Of course not. Why would you? You had best learn to control that temper of yours, Malya, she warned, shaking her head, and Malya knew her well enough to know that she was on the verge of a lecture. The older woman paced in front of her in agitation, throwing her a disappointed glare every once in a while. We are in the middle of a potential enemy's camp, surrounded by 100,000 of his men, and you think that is the appropriate time to challenge him? Malya crossed her arms, her shock fading as the heat of her anger spread through her body again. That pretend king out there sits on his ass, watching tournaments, while our people are fighting in the battles. And that insolent little prick thinks he can insult Robb and question his decisions. I will not let him get away with that. Lady Stark took a deep breath, stopping to stand in front of Malya and placing her hands on her shoulders, bending slightly to catch her gaze. We are guests here, Malya, treated so because of the power our names hold. However, if you continue to insult Renly Baratheon, he could very easily take us prisoner and use us as a bargaining tool against Robb. You need to keep your defenses up, and you need to be smart about what you say and how you say it. She sighed and stepped back. Honestly, I had expected a Princess of Dawn to know better than to behave as you just did. I do. Malya insisted, realizing the dangerous position that her temper had put her in and feeling ashamed all the more for it. I do know better, she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor and her voice lowering. It's just. I don't think as clearly about anything pertaining to Robb. I apologize for being harsh with you, Malya, I've let the pressure of our mission get to me. Lady Stark smiled a soft smile, reaching a hand out to place on Malya's cheek. My son is lucky to have you in his life. But right now he does not need his wife to defend him, he needs his queen to help him lead. Do you think you can help me with this? Malia nodded determinedly, trying to chase away her embarrassment while berating herself at the same time. She had been trained as a princess, her father had personally tutored her in how to control her facial expressions so she wouldn't betray what she was thinking. And then she fell in love with Rob and suddenly it seemed that she couldn't think straight with matters that pertained to him. It was a serious problem and it was something that she was going to have to work on. As unexpected as it was, she was a queen now and most of the time, that came first. I apologize, my lady, I promise it won't happen again. Lady Queen Margaery has invited me to her tent for tea, maybe her husband shares his plans with her and she'll let something slip. Lady Stark looked thoughtful. It's a good idea, just make sure the girl doesn't draw suspicion from your questions. It will have to wait, however, Renly has told me there's to be a feast tonight. But the sooner as we accomplish our goal, the sooner we can get back to Rob. Rob slowly walked amongst his men, threading his way between the tents. He clapped a shoulder here, murmured an encouraging word there, trying to show his face and lend his support. A strange feeling spread through him, bringing with it a sad realization once he realized what it was. He was lonely. He was surrounded by thousands of men, his own men in his own army, and he was lonely. Malia and his mother were south with Renly Baratheon, Theon was dealing with his father on Pike and even Grey Wind was away at the moment. He had disappeared into the woods yesterday to hunt, and was usually gone for a full day before he came trotting back, content. Usually he was back by now, but Rob wasn't too worried, he knew Grey Wind could take care of himself. He's probably still by that stream in the valley, came the unbidden thought. He frowned, his stride faltering as his stupid dream from last night surfaced to the front of his mind, yet again. No matter how hard he tried to push it away, flashes of the dream kept coming back. The strength in his legs as he ran, the sights and scents of the forest and the taste of the meat as his teeth clenched around his prey's throat. It was just a dream, you idiot, Rob scolded himself furiously. You were thinking about Grey before you fell asleep, which was why you dreamt about him. You do not actually know where he was or what he was doing. Forcibly shoving the matter from his mind, Rob put a smile on his face as he stopped to talk to a passing soldier who was walking by on crutches. He tried to focus on the conversation he was having but he was too easily distracted. Something caught his eye over the man's shoulder and Rob frowned. I'm sorry, will you excuse me? Rob asked quickly, interrupting the man mid-sentence and then walking away before he could respond. Rob forgot the man as soon as he was out of sight. A deep frown had crossed his face, his heart leaping in his chest. His eyes were glued to the woman with the long black hair walking ahead of him, not paying attention to where he was going. He bumped shoulders with people, he tripped over a spare shield lying on the ground and nearly impaled himself on a sword but he didn't care. What in the seven hells is she doing here? He thought, a strange mixture of anger, frustration and relief washing through him. Did she somehow sneak past my mother and 20 guards to make her way back here? He mentally paused, acknowledging that it was probably exactly something she would do. He called her name as he caught up to her, eyebrows narrowing when she ignored him. Malia. He growled in irritation, reaching a hand out to grab her elbow and spinning her around. Why aren't you answering? He froze in astonishment, blinking stupidly down at a face that was most certainly not his wife's. Now that he was aware of his mistake, he could see the differences. While they both had black hair and brown eyes, and they were both the same height, her hair had none of Malia's natural curl, her eyes didn't have Malia's twinkle for life, her face was longer and her dress was plain. She didn't quite have Malia's delicate, exotic beauty. I am so sorry, Rob apologized profusely, yanking his hand back immediately, horror in his eyes. I thought you were your wife, the queen. The woman asked, quirking an eyebrow. Rob took another comfortable step back, even her accent was wrong. I'm flattered, Your Grace. Yes, well, that was still highly inappropriate and I have to apologize again, Rob responded, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. I don't know why I mistook you for her, I know that she's not here. You miss her, she replied simply, shrugging. Even though you know she isn't here, you saw what you wanted to see. Rob knew she was right. Malia's absence was a terrible ache in his chest, as if she had taken his heart with her when she left. He missed the way she curled against him when she slept. He missed the way she looked at him, the way she looked at no one else, with those warm brown eyes and that expression that made him feel as if he could do anything. He missed her counsel and their late-night conversations. He missed her lips and what she could do with them. He missed her more than when he left from Winterfell, and he was beginning to wonder if he had made a mistake in sending her away. "What's your name?" Robb asked, trying to focus. "Talisa," she replied, smiling softly when he made an expectant expression. "Talisa Maygai." He frowned, not recognizing her family name. "Where are you from, Talisa?" "Volantis." She paused as someone at one of the medical tents called her name. "Excuse me, Your Grace, I have to help pack up the supplies." "It was a pleasure to meet you." "The